The Alpha King heard a child laugh. His wolf had been waiting years for that sound. Dominic Voss had not slept in 3 days. Not because of the border reports stacked on his desk, though those were bad enough. Not because of the council meeting that had gone on past midnight, though that had been worse. He had not slept because, somewhere around 3 in the morning on the first night, his wolf had stirred inside him for the first time in 7 years, and the feeling had been so strange and so sharp that it had knocked the breath from his chest and kept him standing at his window until the sun came up. He did not tell anyone. He stood now at the head of the long stone table in his war room, looking at the map pinned flat against the wall, and he pressed the memory of that feeling down into the quiet place inside himself, where he kept everything he could not afford to feel. His beta, Riker, was speaking. Dominic heard the words. He was good at appearing to listen. "Southern settlements," Riker said, tapping the map with 2 fingers. "Millhaven took the worst of it. 3 rogue incursions in the past 2 weeks. The settlement elder is asking for a formal response." "What kind of response? Reinforcements, or a visit?" Dominic looked at the map. Millhaven was a small mark near the bottom edge, pressed against the territory line like something that had not quite decided whether it belonged inside the border or outside it. He had been there once, years ago, before the war. He remembered it as a collection of low buildings and determined people who seemed to believe that stubbornness was a form of armor. He had not been wrong about them. "We go ourselves," Dominic said. Riker looked up. "The full escort?" "No, just us." There was a pause. Riker was good at pauses. He had been Dominic's beta for 9 years, and in that time he had learned that some pauses were worth filling and some were not. This one he left alone. They rode out the next morning before the sun was properly up. The road south took them through 3 smaller settlements before the terrain changed, and the trees thinned, and the land opened into the kind of flat, wide country that felt too exposed when you were used to the hills of Iron Peak. Dominic rode in silence. He had always preferred silence on long rides. Riker had long since stopped trying to fill it. What Dominic was thinking about, though he would not have said so, was the feeling from 3 nights ago. It had not returned since that one sharp moment, but it had left something behind. A kind of alertness, a low hum in the back of his awareness, as though his wolf was listening for something it had not yet heard again. He did not understand it. 7 years ago, when his mate Seraphine had died in the border wars, not in battle, but from the fever that swept the eastern camps after the fighting was done, the kind of ending that felt wrong in its quietness, Dominic's wolf had gone still. Not absent, not dead, just still, the way a fire goes still when the wood runs out and only the embers remain. He had made peace with it, or something close enough to peace that the difference was not obvious from the outside. His council told him he was focused. His generals told him he was steady. The packs that answered to Iron Peak told each other he was made of iron, which was not far wrong. He had built an empire on the steadiness that grief had made of him. He had turned the emptiness inside himself into something that looked, from every angle, like strength. He had believed it, mostly. 3 nights ago had suggested otherwise. They arrived at Millhaven in the early afternoon. Dominic had expected what he usually found in border settlements that had been raided. The particular quiet of a place that was holding its breath. People keeping indoors. The visible marks of damage left exactly as they were, because there were not enough hands to fix them. Millhaven was not like that. The market was running. 3 stalls were down at the far end, their frames collapsed and their canopies torn, but the rest were open. A group of older men were repairing the gate at the settlement's west entrance, working with the methodical pace of people who had done this before and expected to do it again. 2 children were carrying a bucket between them, arguing about something with the absolute seriousness of children whose argument is the most important thing happening in the world. It was not peaceful. Dominic could see the tension in the way people moved, the extra attention they paid to the tree line, the way conversation stopped when they noticed him and Riker riding in. But it was functioning, it was upright, it had declined to fold. He respected that. The settlement elder, a woman named Greta, with gray hair, and the direct gaze of someone who had stopped softening her words decades ago, met them at the center of the square. She gave Dominic the formal greeting his rank required, and then got immediately to the details. The incursions, the pattern of attacks, what the rogues had taken, what they had damaged, what they had not managed to damage because people had gotten in the way. 3 of ours were hurt in the last one, she said. None badly. But we were lucky. We won't stay lucky without better fortification on the eastern side. Show me, Dominic said. They walked the perimeter. Dominic listened and assessed and asked questions and said very little else. This was how he worked. He had learned, over years of ruling, that people told you more when you were quiet than when you spoke. It was while they were walking the eastern edge, the weakest section of the settlement's border, a stretch of low fence and open ground that made him frown, that he saw her for the first time. She was working at one of the fallen market stalls, the ones that had been knocked down in the last raid. She was not alone. A small child was sitting on the ground nearby, apparently very occupied with a collection of pebbles arranged in a pattern that clearly meant something to the child, even if no one else could have guessed what. 2 older children, someone else's by the look of them, were helping with the stall frame, holding poles while the woman directed them. She was rebuilding it, not salvaging it, not clearing the wreckage, rebuilding it, methodically, with the kind of focus that meant she was not doing it because she had to, but because she had decided it was going to be done, and that was that. Dominic watched her for perhaps 15 seconds. He told himself he was noting the state of the stall, the extent of the damage, the general condition of the settlement's infrastructure. He told himself several things in those 15 seconds, none of which were particularly convincing. What he actually noticed was the line of her jaw, set and quiet. The way she spoke to the older children, a few words, clear and direct, not unkind. The fact that she did not look up when his presence sent a ripple through the people nearby, though she clearly knew he was there, because the set of her shoulders shifted almost imperceptibly for a moment, before settling again. She kept working. Dominic looked away. "Who is that?" he asked Greta, quietly enough that it would not carry. Greta followed his gaze, and made the small sound of someone who had just been told something they already suspected. "Lena Ashvale," she said. "She manages the market, among other things." "She lives here?" "Born here, near enough. She's been holding this place together since before the last round of raids." Greta paused. "The little one on the ground is her daughter, Mara, 4 years old, and absolutely convinced she runs the settlement." Dominic did not respond to that. He looked at the child, sitting in the dirt with her pebbles, entirely unbothered by the Alpha King 20 feet away. She had dark hair, and was wearing boots that were slightly too big for her, and was talking quietly to one of the pebbles, in the way small children talk to things they have decided are important. Something moved in his chest, not the sharp feeling from 3 nights ago, something smaller, gentler. He turned back to the eastern fence line. "I'll have materials sent from the pack stores," he told Greta. "Timber and iron for the eastern section, a crew in 2 weeks." Greta nodded. "That's more than we expected." "It's what's needed," Dominic said, and moved on. He did not go near the woman by the stall. He did not speak to her. He did not look at her again, or not in any way that he would have admitted to, later, if someone had asked. He and Riker left Millhaven an hour later. The sun was lower by then, cutting across the flat land at an angle that made everything look gold and distant. Dominic rode without speaking. After a long while, Riker said, "She didn't look up when you walked by." "No," Dominic agreed. Another long silence. "Most people look up," Riker said. Dominic said nothing. He was thinking about the feeling in his chest when he had looked at the child on the ground. It had been small and quiet, and he did not know what to call it. He had spent 7 years carefully naming every feeling he allowed himself to have, so that he could set each one in its proper place and move on. This one did not have a name that fit. He let the silence of the road swallow it. That night, back in his own rooms, he stood at the window again. The Iron Peak Hills were dark shapes against a darker sky. He had stood at this window on the night Seraphine died. He had stood here after her funeral, after the last of the mourners left. He had stood here on every night, since when the weight of what he carried got too heavy to set down and sleep under. He was good at standing at windows. His wolf was quiet, but it was not the same quiet as before. Before, the quiet had felt like absence, like a room where the fire has gone out and will not be lit again. Tonight the quiet felt like waiting, like the held breath before something begins. Dominic pressed his hand against the cold stone of the windowsill. He thought about the woman kneeling in the dirt beside a broken stall, rebuilding it without being asked, without complaining, without looking up at the Alpha King who stood 20 feet away. He thought about the child talking to a pebble. He thought about the settlement elder's voice, holding this place together. He had met many people in his years of rule. He had met warriors and scholars and merchants and governors and diplomats and every kind of person that power attracts. He had seen every form of strength that people could show him. He could not say what it was about those 15 seconds that had stayed with him. He was not sure he wanted to try. He had learned, over 7 years, that some things did not survive being examined too closely, the way a soap bubble disappears when you touch it. He stepped back from the window and went to his desk and picked up the border reports he had been ignoring. The words blurred slightly. He put them down. He was tired in a way that sleep would not fix, and awake in a way that exhaustion would not touch, and somewhere in the middle of that contradiction was the faint, persistent hum of his wolf, listening for something it had not heard yet. He did not know that he was going back to Millhaven. He just knew that, when the next excuse arrived, he was going to take it. It came 5 days later, in the form of a message from the settlement elder about the drainage problem in the market square. Water was pooling after rain and affecting the stall foundations. An engineering assessment was needed before the reconstruction crew arrived. Dominic sent his reply himself, rather than through his secretary. He would come. Riker read the reply over his shoulder and said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then he said, very carefully, "You're doing the drainage assessment yourself." "Yes," Dominic said. Riker was quiet for another moment. "All right," he said. The second ride to Millhaven was longer than the first, in the way that anticipated things always feel longer. Dominic noticed more on this road, the way the trees changed, the point where the hills gave way to flat land, the first visible sign of the settlement's walls in the distance. He was not a man who usually paid attention to such things. He paid attention to them now. They arrived at midday. The settlement was in the same determined state as before, busy, upright, functioning. People recognized him and gave him the appropriate acknowledgement, and then went back to what they were doing, because Millhaven had always been the kind of place where work did not stop for ceremony. He did not go immediately to the market square. He walked the western section of the fence with Riker first, checking the placement of the planned repair work, making sure the materials he had requisitioned would be enough. He was thorough. He was methodical. He was also watching, from the corner of his eye, for a woman with dark hair and a set jaw. He found her at the market, as before, but this time she saw him approaching, and she straightened up from what she was doing, inspecting the ground near the stalls where the water was pooling, as it happened, and she looked at him with the same direct, unhurried gaze he remembered. She did not smile. She did not perform the particular softness that people often performed for him. She just looked at him, and then she said, "The drainage problem is worse than the elder's message described. The slope on the eastern end of the square is wrong. Has been since it was laid." Dominic stopped. "Show me," he said. And she did. She walked him through the problem with the calm precision of someone who had already worked it out and was simply sharing information, not auditioning for anything. The water came in from the east, pooled in the low center of the square, and had nowhere to go because the original drainage channels had been built without accounting for the square's actual grade. Every heavy rain made it worse. The stall foundations had been softening for 2 years. "The reconstruction crew will work on the fence first," Dominic said, when she finished. She shook her head. "That's the wrong order. If the drainage isn't fixed before the new stalls go in, the foundations will go soft again within a season. You'd be rebuilding twice." He looked at her. She met his gaze steadily and said nothing further, in the manner of someone who has said what is true and is comfortable waiting for the other person to catch up. He thought about telling her he was the Alpha King, and he had been making decisions about settlement infrastructure for longer than she had been managing a market square. He did not tell her that. "Drainage first," he said. Something shifted briefly in her expression. Not quite a smile, but the shadow of one. She nodded and went back to her assessment. Dominic stood there for a moment, in the middle of the market square of a border settlement he had technically outranked in every possible way, and felt, for the second time that week, something he did not have a clean name for. Mara appeared from behind one of the standing stalls at that moment, running at full speed for no apparent reason, shouting something that turned out to be a question about what was for dinner. She ran directly past Dominic without slowing, without acknowledging him, without displaying any of the instinctive caution that most people, even grown ones, showed in the presence of an Alpha King. She grabbed her mother's hand. She looked up at Dominic with large, fearless eyes. "Are you the one who's going to fix things?" she asked him. Dominic looked down at the small face, looking up at him. "Yes," he said. Mara considered him for a moment. "Good," she said, and turned her attention to her mother with an update about the dinner situation that was clearly urgent. Dominic walked back toward Riker. His wolf was doing the thing again, that lifting, that listening, that shift from still to alert that he had not felt in 7 years. Riker looked at him, and then, very wisely, looked away. The sun was lower now, and the market square was beginning to quiet. Dominic stood near the edge of it, with a border report in his hand that he was not reading, and he listened to the sounds of Millhaven settling into evening, the creak of a cart, the call of someone closing up a stall, the far-off conversation of 2 people on the western path. And under all of it, under everything, the quiet hum of his wolf, waiting. Lena Ashvale had a rule about men who showed up offering to fix things. The rule was simple. Watch what they actually do, not what they say they will do. She had learned this rule young and learned it hard, and in the years since, it had saved her a great deal of time and a certain amount of heartbreak. Men who said they would fix things and then did not were common. Men who said nothing and simply fixed things were considerably rarer, and Lena had learned to tell the difference. She was not sure yet which kind Dominic Voss was. She had known he was the Alpha King before he arrived the first time. Greta had told her, and even if Greta hadn't, the ripple that moved through the settlement the moment he rode in would have told her. People had a way of adjusting themselves around power, straightening up, going quieter, recalculating, and Dominic Voss was the kind of power that produced a very noticeable adjustment. Lena had not adjusted, not visibly anyway. She had kept her hands on the stall frame she was repairing, and kept her attention on what she was doing, because the stall was not going to rebuild itself, and because making herself look busy had always been one of the more useful things she knew how to do. But she had been aware of him. It was difficult not to be. He was large in the way that certain people are large, not just in size, though he was tall, but in the space he occupied, in the particular quality of the attention he drew from everyone around him. She had felt his gaze on her for a moment, just a moment, and then it had moved on. She had kept working. That night, after Mara was asleep and the settlement had gone quiet, Lena sat at the small table in her kitchen, with a cup of tea she was not really drinking, and thought about the expression she had caught on the Alpha King's face when he had looked at the market square. It had been something she recognized. Not admiration exactly, and not the particular kind of looking that men sometimes did when they thought they were not being noticed. It had been more like assessment, a serious, quiet look that was taking in a problem and thinking about how to solve it. The same look she gave to things she intended to fix. She did not know what to do with that. Lena's history with men was not long or complicated. There had been one serious relationship in her early 20s, which had ended when the man in question decided that Millhaven was too small, and too quiet, and too far from everything he wanted, and that Lena's attachment to it was something he could not understand. He had not been wrong about that. She did not blame him for leaving. She blamed him, mildly, for not knowing himself well enough to figure it out before she had started to plan a future around him. Mara's father had been something different, less a relationship and more a season, a trader who had come through 3 times and been charming and warm and interested in a way that had felt, briefly, like something. He had moved on before she knew about Mara, and she had spent a week being angry and then gotten on with it, because getting on with it was what she did. She had told Mara, in terms a 4-year-old could manage, that her father lived far away and did not know about her. She planned to fill in the details later, in terms a 7-year-old could manage, and then an 11-year-old, and so on. She was not afraid of the conversation. She was just waiting until Mara had the equipment for it. Mara, for her part, seemed entirely unconcerned. She had Lena, and she had Greta, and she had the various neighbors who had long since accepted her as a feature of the settlement, the way they accepted the well and the market and the unreliable East Gate. This appeared to be enough. Lena was the one who carried the weight of what Mara did not have. She was good at carrying weight quietly. The Alpha King came back 5 days later. She was in the market square when he arrived, crouching near the low end of the square where water always pooled after rain. working out in her head the cost of regrading the ground versus the cost of installing proper drainage channels. She heard the shift in the settlement's ambient sound that always announced his arrival, the slight drop in conversation, the adjustment of pace, and stood up and turned to find him approaching. He looked the same as he had the first time. She was not sure why she had expected him to look different. She told him about the drainage problem. All of it, not just the summary. The exact grade of the ground, the original error in the construction, the way water moved across the square in heavy rain, the 2 years of foundation damage that had resulted. She told him because it was relevant information, and because he was the one who could authorize the materials to fix it. She was not nervous. She was almost never nervous. What she was, sometimes, was careful, and she was careful now. Watching him listen, watching the way he processed what she said, watching for the slight impatience, or the glazed look that indicated he had already stopped listening and was waiting for her to finish. He did neither. He listened to everything she said, and when she finished, he said, "The crew will work on the fence first." She told him that was the wrong order. She had not planned to tell him that. It had simply been true, and she had said it, and then she had been aware that she had just told the Alpha King of Iron Peak that he was wrong about something, and she had waited to see what that would cost her. He had changed the order. She thought about that more than she meant to. The materials arrived from the pack stores 8 days later, more than she had expected, and better quality than she had asked for. 2 wagon loads of timber and iron, enough for the fence repairs and the new stall frames both, with a smaller cart carrying stones and sand for the drainage work. There was a note attached in plain handwriting that said the drainage crew would arrive in 4 days and would need direction on the grade. Lena read the note twice. She looked at the stones and sand. She thought, carefully and briefly, about the man who had listened to everything she said and changed his plan based on what she told him, and then she put the thought away and started working out where to store the materials. The drainage crew arrived as promised, which was the first thing. The second thing was that they arrived with him. She saw him from across the square, not riding in this time but walking, in plain working clothes without the marks of rank he wore for formal business, talking to one of his men about something that looked like schematics. He was carrying rolled papers under one arm. He looked, in that moment, like someone who had come to work and intended to do it. Lena stood with her list of materials in her hand and watched him cross the square and felt something shift, quietly, in the back of her chest. She did not acknowledge it immediately. She had a lot of practice not acknowledging things that needed to be examined more carefully before they were allowed to exist. She walked over and said, "You're early." "The road was clear," he said. "The grade marks are on the south end. I've laid out the channel lines." "Show me," he said, which were, she was noticing, 2 of his most frequently used words. She showed him. They walked the drainage lines she had marked in the ground, and he looked at them and asked 2 questions that were good questions, the kind that came from someone who understood the principles of water movement and settlement construction, and was checking her reasoning rather than doubting it. She answered both questions, and was aware, again, of that careful attention, the complete absence of the look that meant he was waiting for her to stop talking. "The south channel wants to be 6 inches deeper," he said, after a moment. She looked at the mark. She thought about it. She said, "You're right." He looked at her then. Not a long look, not a complicated one. Just a brief moment of something that might have been surprise, quickly replaced by something quieter. "You have a good eye for this," he said. "I've been fixing this settlement's problems for 3 years," she said. "I've had practice." She walked to the south end of the drainage line to revise her mark, and did not see his expression change, though it did. Mara found him at lunchtime. This was inevitable. Mara found everyone. She had an unerring instinct for the most important or interesting person in any space, and went directly to them, without any of the hesitation that most people had to train out of themselves over years. Lena had tried to moderate this tendency, with limited success, because Mara seemed to view the world as a place that had been arranged for her interest and convenience, and thus far no one had given her compelling evidence to the contrary. Dominic was standing near the eastern fence, reviewing the repair schedule with Riker, when Mara walked up to him, and stood beside him, and looked at what he was looking at, with the expression of someone reviewing documents she had every right to review. Riker saw her first. Lena, watching from across the square with her heart doing something complicated, saw Riker blink, and then carefully arrange his face into neutrality. Mara said, without introduction, "What are those?" Dominic looked down at the small person who had appeared at his elbow. "Plans," he said. "For what?" "The fence." Mara looked at the fence, then at the plans, then back at Dominic. "It's broken," she informed him, in case he had not noticed. "I know. That's why there are plans." Mara considered this. "Are you going to fix it?" "Yes." She nodded, satisfied, and looked at the plans again. She pointed to a section of the diagram with her small finger. "What's that?" Lena arrived then, slightly out of breath, and said, "Mara, you can't just walk up to people and look at their papers." Mara looked up at her with the expression she used when she felt an explanation had been misapplied. "I asked first." Dominic said. "She did ask." Lena looked at him. He was looking at Mara with an expression she could not quite categorize, something between careful and uncertain, like a person who is not sure of the rules of a situation, but is paying very close attention. "She's 4, Lena said. "She doesn't know what she's supposed to ask permission for." "Neither do most people," he said, "but they do it anyway." He looked at Lena then, a brief look, and then he rolled the plans and tucked them under his arm and said, "To Mara. The gate goes in the section I marked in red." Mara nodded seriously. "Okay," she said, and walked away. Lena watched her go. She was aware of standing next to Dominic Voss in the middle of her market square, with the sun overhead and sawdust on her hands, and absolutely no idea what to say next. "She's not afraid of anything," he said. He was still watching Mara. "No," Lena agreed. "Where does that come from?" Lena thought about it honestly. "I think she was just born that way," she said. "I've been trying to figure out how to teach her appropriate caution for 4 years, and she's entirely resistant." Something moved across his face. Not a smile exactly, but the thing that happens to a face just before a smile, when the muscles remember the shape but are not quite ready to commit to it. "Appropriate caution is overrated," he said, quietly, and then he walked back toward Riker. Lena stood in the market square for a moment after he left, her hands still dusty, the sun still overhead, and considered the sensation in her chest. She put it away. She was good at putting things away. The crew worked for 4 days on the drainage and the fence. Dominic stayed for all 4 days, which was not what she had expected. She had assumed he would oversee the first day and leave instructions and ride back to Iron Peak and his empire of 5 territories and his enormous responsibilities. He did not do that. He stayed, working through the repair schedule with his men in the mornings and reviewing the drainage progress in the afternoons. And somewhere in the middle of the 3rd day, Lena realized she had stopped being surprised by his presence and had started simply accounting for it in her plans. That realization bothered her more than she expected. On the 4th evening, when the crew had stopped for the day and the light was going gold and orange over the flat land to the west, she found him standing at the edge of the market square looking at the completed drainage channel with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has watched a problem become a solution. She stood beside him. They both looked at the channel. "It'll hold through the wet season," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "You didn't have to stay the whole 4 days." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "No." She waited for more, but there wasn't any. She looked at his profile, the strong jaw, the eyes that were a particular dark shade that the evening light was doing interesting things to, the slight tension around his mouth that was always there, as though he was holding something in. She had heard things about him, of course. Everyone in the Pack territories had. She knew about the border wars. She knew about Seraphine. She knew the outline of it, the way you know the outline of any story that has become part of the general understanding of a place. The alpha who won the wars and lost his mate and turned himself into stone afterward. People said it with a kind of sad respect, the way people talk about anyone who has suffered well. She looked at him now, standing next to her, in the quiet of a border settlement with the gold light on his face, and she thought that the stone was not as solid as it appeared. She said nothing about this. She said, "The stall crew can come any time after tomorrow. The ground will be set." He nodded. "I'll send word to have them moved up." "Thank you." He looked at her then. Just for a moment, the same brief, clear look she had been getting from him all week. "Thank you," he said, "for the drainage order." She held his gaze. "You would have figured it out." "Probably," he said, But later, she felt something in her chest do a slow, complicated movement. She looked away first. Mara appeared at the end of the square, running toward her mother with the news that Greta had made soup and there was enough for everyone. She was also wearing one of Dominic's riding gloves on her right hand, for reasons that were entirely unclear. "Mara," Lena said, "where did you get that?" Mara looked at the glove. "He left it on the fence," she said, as though this explained everything, and held out her gloved hand to be inspected. Lena looked at Dominic. Dominic looked at his hand, where the glove in question was indeed missing. "You can keep it," he said to Mara. Mara accepted this with the gravity of someone receiving a very reasonable tribute and ran back toward Greta's house. Lena stood next to the Alpha King of Iron Peak in the gathering dark and did not trust herself to speak for a moment, because something was happening in her chest that she had not felt in a very long time, and she was not yet ready to give it a name. She settled for, "I'll see you when the stall crew arrives." "Yes," he said. He rode out the next morning. She did not watch him go, because she had things to do, and also because she did not want to be the kind of person who stood watching someone ride away. She found out from Riker, who had stopped to speak to Greta before leaving, and had been very carefully casual about mentioning it, that the Alpha King had rerouted 2 of his scheduled inspections so that Millhaven would be on his route in 12 days. Lena chopped vegetables for dinner and thought about that and told herself, very firmly, that it was policy. Settlement strengthening. Perfectly sensible administration. Mara came in wearing the riding glove and told her mother that soup was not enough for dinner and they needed bread too. Lena made the bread. She was still thinking about it. The laugh arrived without warning, the way the most important things always do. Dominic was standing near the well at the eastern edge of the market square, reading a report on rogue movement patterns that Riker had handed him that morning. It was not an encouraging report. The rogues were not disorganized opportunists, which would have been manageable. They were operating with a pattern, hitting the same settlements in rotation, avoiding areas where patrol routes were predictable, pulling back before an effective response could be mounted. Someone was directing them, someone who understood settlement geography and pack patrol timing. He was thinking about this, seriously and with his full attention, when the sound arrived. It came from the far end of the square, near the overturned crate that had been sitting there for 2 days waiting to be moved. It was a child's laugh, high and clear and completely unguarded, the kind of laugh that doesn't know it's being heard, the kind of laugh that has no performance in it at all, only the pure and present fact of finding something funny. Dominic turned his head. The girl, Mara, 4 years old, with her dark hair escaping from a braid someone had clearly put a great deal of effort into, was chasing a hen around the base of the overturned crate. The hen was one of 3 that the settlement's corner farm let wander the square in the afternoons, and it was not interested in being caught. It moved with the dignified speed of a bird that had been through this before. Mara moved with the total lack of strategy of a child who believed enthusiasm was sufficient. She was not catching the hen. She was also not troubled by this. Every time the hen darted away, she laughed again, the same clear, unguarded sound, and changed direction, and tried again, stumbling slightly on the cobblestones, righting herself without pausing, entirely focused on the game, and entirely unconcerned with whether anyone was watching. Dominic's wolf hit the surface from the inside. That was the only way he could describe it, later, in the quiet of his room, when he allowed himself to think about it. It rose from the deep place where it had been quiet for 7 years, and hit the surface of him like something solid striking water. Sudden, complete, undeniable. He actually took a step back, physically, because the force of it was not something he had been prepared for. It was not the child. He understood that, even in the first moment. It was not the laugh directly. It was what the laugh was pulling him toward, where his eyes moved, in the second after the sound reached him. The woman in the doorway. Lena had appeared from the entrance of the storage building that faced the square, the one where she kept the market supplies. She was wiping her hands on a cloth, the way she always seemed to be doing something practical when he saw her, and she was looking at her daughter with an expression that stopped him completely. It was not a remarkable expression in the conventional sense. It was not dramatic or intense or the kind of look that poets write about. It was tired and amused and helpless and full. A complete, unguarded love that had not bothered to put on anything over itself, because there was no one around that she was performing for. Except there was. Dominic was 20 feet away. She did not know he was looking. She was looking at Mara, and in the fraction of a second before she turned her head and saw him, he saw something in her face that he had not seen from anyone in a very long time. A person who was exactly where they were, feeling exactly what they felt, with no management of it at all. Then she turned and looked directly at him. She did not flinch. She did not smile the particular smile people gave him when they found him watching. The anxious, adjusting smile of someone recalibrating quickly. She just looked at him, steady and direct, for a moment that lasted slightly longer than was neutral. Then she looked back at Mara, who had cornered the hen against the crate, and was now attempting to negotiate with it in serious, low tones. Dominic stood in the middle of the market square of Millhaven, with his report in his hand, and his wolf doing something he had stopped believing it would ever do again. And he was, for possibly the first time in 7 years, completely uncertain what to do next. Riker appeared at his shoulder. He said nothing for a moment, looking at what Dominic was looking at. Then, with great care, he said, "You've been holding that report at the wrong angle for about 3 minutes." Dominic looked at the report. He straightened it. He went back to reading it. He did not read a single word. He had come to Millhaven this time, on the pretext of reviewing the stall reconstruction that had begun the day before. It was not entirely a pretext. The stalls did need reviewing, and he had made decisions about their design that required a practical check. But he was also aware, with the particular self-honesty he had developed over 7 years of refusing to lie to himself about anything, that he had found reasons to be in Millhaven, at a rate that was difficult to justify on operational grounds alone. He had been here 4 times in the past 3 weeks. Riker had said nothing about this. Riker's silence on the matter was the loudest thing in Dominic's daily life. The thing that was happening was this. Somewhere between the first visit and the 4th, Millhaven had stopped being a settlement with a problem, and had started being a place he wanted to be. He had examined this feeling carefully and without sentiment, the way he examined everything. He had asked himself whether it was the settlement itself, its stubborn uprightness, its refusal to fold, the particular quality of a place that worked because its people chose to work. That was part of it, he thought. It was not the whole of it. Lena Ashvale was the whole of it, or a significant portion. He had been trying to be honest with himself about this without being reckless about it, which was a more difficult balance than it sounded. She managed the market with a precision that was almost military. Supply schedules, stall assignments, pricing negotiations, dispute mediation, all of it handled with a calm efficiency that would have been impressive in a person twice her age, with twice her resources. She knew every family in the settlement, every ongoing difficulty, every supply shortage before it became a crisis. She knew the land, the drainage grade, the frost line, the way the wind moved across the square in the cold months, and which stalls needed extra protection. She also, when she disagreed with something, said so. Clearly and without apology. This happened more often than Dominic was used to, and he found, to his own surprise, that he did not dislike it. He had spent 7 years surrounded by people who adjusted their words to what they thought he wanted to hear, and the absence of that adjustment in her was startling, in a way that felt, increasingly, like relief. He came back after the lunch break to check the stall alignment, and found her on the roof of the easternmost stall, nailing down a crossbeam with a focus that indicated she had been doing this for some time, and was not planning to stop. He stood below and said, "You have a crew for that." She drove in another nail before answering. "The crew did the frame wrong on this one. If I wait for them to notice, the whole thing will have to come down. You could have told them." "I did. They're fixing the other 3. I'm faster on this one myself." She looked down at him briefly. "Can you hand up the bag on the left?" He handed up the bag. He stayed below, watching her work, which he told himself was practical. Someone should be there in case anything shifted. It had nothing to do with the particular line of her shoulders when she reached across the beam, or the way she moved on the roof, with the easy balance of someone who was not afraid of heights, or the fact that she talked to herself very quietly while she worked, in a tone too low to make out but clearly critical of the original crew's approach to carpentry. "Done," she said, after a while, and came back down the side of the stall with the efficiency of someone who did not particularly need a ladder. She stood next to him, dusting off her hands, and looked up at the beam she had fixed. "Better," she said. "Yes," he agreed. She looked at him. "You're checking on the alignment." "I was. It's fine." The third stall from the south wants to move 6 inches east. The spacing is off. He looked at the third stall from the south. She was right. I'll have it corrected. She nodded and picked up her bag. She was about to leave when Mara came running from the direction of Greta's house, calling for her mother and waving something above her head that turned out to be a drawing she had done, apparently of the market square, though it bore only an abstract relationship to the actual market square. It featured a large purple shape that might have been a building, and several smaller shapes that might have been people, and a very large round element that Mara identified, when asked, as the well. It doesn't look much like the well, Lena said. That's because it's a special well, Mara said, with the logic of someone who did not see a problem. She held the drawing out to Dominic. He took it. He was not sure he had been offered a child's drawing in many years. He was not sure what the correct response was. Mara looked up at him expectantly. "Thank you," he said. Mara nodded, as though this had been the obvious response. "It's for you," she said, "because you fixed the drainage. The drainage team fixed the drainage." Mara gave him a look that was remarkably similar to her mother's look for people who were missing a fairly obvious point. "You came," she said. "That's the part that mattered." She ran back to Greta's house, apparently satisfied. Dominic stood in the market square with a drawing of a special well in his hand, and felt his wolf do something it had not done since Seraphine was alive: settle. Not the settling of an animal going still again, going back into silence. The other kind. The settling of something that has been looking for a place to rest, and has found, tentatively, a place that might do. He looked at Lena. She was watching him with an expression he could not fully read. Something careful and warm at the same time. The look of a person who is feeling something they are not yet ready to put words to. "She draws pictures for people she likes," Lena said. "She doesn't give them to everyone." "I see," he said. "I'm telling you, so you know it means something. Not to make anything complicated." He looked at the drawing, then at her. "Understood," he said. There was a pause. A different kind of pause than the ones that usually existed between them. Not the comfortable silence of two people working in parallel, but something more uncertain, an awareness of something unspoken, that was becoming harder to keep that way. Lena said, "I need to get back to the supply inventory." "I know," he said. She started to walk away, and then she stopped and turned back and said, with the directness she brought to everything, "Dominic." He looked at her. It was the first time she had used his name without his title in front of it. "Whatever it is you keep coming here for," she said, "you should probably figure out if it's real." She walked back to the storage building. He stood in the square for a long moment. Riker appeared at his elbow again, carrying a different report, looking at the horizon with the tremendous concentration of a man who was not listening to anything at all. Dominic looked at the drawing in his hand. The special well, the large purple building, the small shapes that might have been people. "She told me to figure out if it's real," he said. "And?" Riker said, to the horizon. Dominic thought about 7 years of silence. He thought about 3 nights ago, when the wolf rose, and his hand had pressed flat against the cold window stone, and he had stood there until morning. He thought about the laugh, the clear, open sound of a child finding the world funny, and the woman in the doorway with her guard down and love visible on her face, not for him, for her daughter, the kind of love that asks nothing back and does not know how to perform itself. He thought about what it had felt like to see that. "Yes," he said, "it's real." Riker said nothing for a moment, then, "All right. That's all you have to say?" "I've been waiting 7 years to have anything to say," Riker told him. "Give me a moment to appreciate the situation." Dominic let him have the moment. He was still holding the drawing. He looked at it again, the special well, round and bright, taking up nearly a third of the page, the large purple shape, the small figures that might have been people, scattered at the edges. Mara had not explained the small figures. He had not asked. He wondered, now, which one was him, if any of them were. He wondered if Mara had put him in the picture, or if he had appeared there by accident, one of the edge shapes that were simply present because she had run out of center. He thought probably she had put him there deliberately. Mara did not do things by accident. He had been at Millhaven 4 times. And in those 4 times, the child had given him a glove and a drawing, and told him honestly when he'd gotten the wrong answer, and had sat on his boot in the square without making it into anything, and had told him that the part that mattered was that he had come. You came. That's the part that mattered. He put the drawing away carefully, inside his jacket, against his chest, where he could feel the slight weight of the paper. He looked at the square. He looked at the stalls, the new ones standing straight, the third one from the south, slightly misaligned, just as she had said. He looked at the well. He looked at the storage building across the square, where Lena had gone back to her work. He thought about the word real, what it meant, applied to a feeling you had not expected, and could not control, and had not asked for. What made a thing real was not that it was comfortable, or convenient, or that it arrived in a form that made sense. What made it real was that it was there whether you wanted it or not, whether you were ready or not, whether the timing was good or not. This was there. This had been there since the first morning he had stood at his window before sunrise and felt his wolf move, after 7 years of stillness. It had been there when he rode back to Millhaven the second time on a drainage pretext, and the third time, and the fourth. It was there now, standing in the market square with a drawing in his pocket and Riker beside him, and the sun moving through the afternoon clouds. "All right," Dominic said, which was something he did not usually say. He walked to the third stall from the south, and measured the distance to the south wall. 6 inches, exactly as she had said. He had a crew move it before the end of the afternoon. He stood and watched them do it, and when it was done, he looked at the line of stalls, straight, even, properly spaced, and thought that this was what it looked like when you did things in the right order. Drainage first, then the rest. The thing about grief that no one tells you is that it does not always feel like sadness. Sometimes it feels like control. It feels like the cool, organized certainty of a man who has eliminated everything uncertain from his life, who has turned himself into something so precisely ordered that nothing can catch him off guard again. It feels, from the inside, a lot like strength. It is only when you stand in a border market square on a clear afternoon, holding a child's drawing and unable to move, that you begin to understand what it actually was. Dominic understood this on the drive back to Iron Peak, and it was not a comfortable understanding. He had spent 7 years building a version of himself that he had been fairly satisfied with, the Iron Alpha, the king who had won the wars and kept the borders, and ruled with a steady hand. He had made himself useful to the people who depended on him, and he had allowed the making of himself into something useful to fill the space where Seraphine used to be. It was not healing exactly, but it was something. It was enough. He had told himself it was enough. The girl with the drawing and the laugh had inconveniently suggested otherwise. He arrived at Iron Peak on a gray afternoon and went directly to his desk and worked until midnight, which was what he did when he needed to think without thinking. His steward brought him food that he ate without tasting. Riker stopped by at 9 to deliver a message from the Northern Territories, and stayed for 3 minutes, and then left without saying anything, because Riker had excellent instincts about when Dominic needed to be left alone. At midnight, Dominic sat back from his desk and looked at the ceiling. His wolf was not quiet. It had not been quiet since the moment in the market square, and the not quietness was its own kind of pressure, a constant low hum that was not pain and was not joy, but was something that would not let him rest. He had been trying to identify it for 2 days, and had finally arrived at a word he had not used in a very long time, at least not as it applied to himself. The word was hope, uncomfortable, unwanted, and apparently completely indifferent to whether he was ready for it. He went to his window. The hills were dark, the sky had the particular deep blue that came just before dawn, and the stars were beginning to fade at the edges. He thought about what Lena had said, figure out if it's real. He had answered that question, standing in the square with the drawing in his hand. The answer had been yes, and it had been immediate, and it had come not from thought, but from somewhere deeper than thought, the place where his wolf lived. What came next was a great deal more complicated. He was the Alpha King of Iron Peak. He ruled 5 territories and commanded the loyalty of 8 packs. His council had opinions about everything, including, particularly, the question of who he might eventually choose to bring into his life in a formal capacity. There were, in the council's view, appropriate choices. The appropriate choices were women of pack rank, political utility, and social standing. They were, in short, nothing like a market manager from a border settlement who had once told him he was working in the wrong order. He had not asked his council's opinion. He had also not done anything to invite it. But he was not naive about how things moved in his world. Information traveled. People noticed. The Alpha King's 4 visits to Millhaven in 3 weeks had not gone unobserved, and the conclusions being drawn from them were, Dominic suspected, not far wrong. He went to his desk and pulled out the border reports. He put them down again. He pulled out the drawing of the special well and looked at it for a moment in the lamplight, and then put it away carefully in the drawer, where he kept the things he did not want the household staff to move. He made a decision, sitting at his desk at 4 in the morning. He did not make it emotionally. He had too much practice at control for that. He made it the way he made all his decisions, by looking at it from every angle, identifying what it would require, and determining whether the cost was one he was willing to pay. The cost, in this case, was the council's comfort and the disruption of several political arrangements that had been quietly assumed rather than formally agreed to. It was not a small cost. He was not a man who disrupted things lightly. He was also not a man who had felt his wolf come alive in 7 years. He made his decision. Then he did what he always did when the decision was made. He went to sleep, because an Alpha King who did not sleep was not useful to anyone. He went back to Millhaven 6 days later, on the pretext of a supply review. The pretext was increasingly thin. Riker did not point this out. He found the settlement in good order. Better order than he had ever seen it, actually, because the stall reconstruction had been completed, and the new drainage channels had been cleaned and tested, and the eastern fence now stood solid and straight where it had been leaning 2 weeks ago. Millhaven looked, for the first time in his memory, like a place that had been properly cared for. Lena had done that. Not single-handedly. The crew from Iron Peak had done the physical work. The settlement's own people had contributed time and effort. Greta had organized and coordinated. But the blueprint for it, the plan and the order and the specific decisions that had made it work rather than simply happen, had come from Lena. He could see her thinking in the way it had been done. He found her at the supply building, doing inventory, and she looked up when he came in and said, "The east stall roof needs checking. The crossbeam I repaired is holding, but there's movement in the frame when the wind comes from the north. I'll have someone look at it," he said. "I already sent a message to your steward. I thought you might not come this week." He stopped. "You thought I might not come?" She looked at him steadily. "People have busy lives. I didn't want to assume." He was quiet for a moment. "I said I would come." "You did," she agreed. "But there was a gap. I didn't want the roof waiting on it." He understood, then, that she had been protecting herself from depending on him. The realization was sharp and simple and a little difficult. She had been building a contingency, a way of getting things done that did not rely on his presence, because she had decided, at some point, not to assume his presence was reliable. He could not blame her for that. He had done nothing to make himself reliable, yet. 4 visits were not reliability. 4 visits were an attractive beginning that could end at any time. "Lena," he said. She looked up again. "I'm not going to stop coming." She was quiet. She put down her inventory list and looked at him with the expression she had when she was weighing something carefully. Not skeptical, not hopeful, just careful. "You can't know that," she said. "I can," he said. "Not everything is uncertain." "Everything is uncertain," she said, not unkindly. "That's just what's true." He did not argue the point. He sat down on a crate across from her, which was not something he usually did. He was not a man who sat on crates. And he said, "Tell me what you need to believe it." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I don't need to believe anything yet. I just need to not plan around you until there's a reason to." "Fair," he said. "And I need you to understand that I have Mara." "I know." "No, I mean I need you to really understand it. Not just acknowledge it. She's not something on the edge of my life. She's the center of it. Whatever happens, she comes first. And she's 4 years old. And she likes you. And if you disappear, she's going to know." He held her gaze. "I understand. You say that. But men who haven't raised children often say they understand things they don't actually understand." He thought about that honestly. She was not wrong. He had not raised a child. He had no direct experience of what it meant to be responsible for a small person who did not understand that the world could take things away from her. "Then I'll learn to understand," he said. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she picked up her inventory list and said, "The supply numbers are short on grain and long on salt. I think whoever filled the last order reversed the amounts." He accepted the change of subject. "I'll have it corrected. I sent the correct numbers in the message to your steward." He almost smiled. She had taken care of it already. The afternoon carried on, in the way afternoons in Millhaven had been carrying on for several weeks now, the quiet rhythm of work happening in parallel, Lena managing the supply side of things, and Dominic working through the structural review with his men, the two of them sharing the space of the settlement with a naturalness that had crept up on both of them without announcement. What had changed, he thought, was not any single thing. It was accumulation. The way you did not notice a fire growing warmer until you realized you had taken off your coat. Mara arrived at 3 in the afternoon with a grievance about something that had happened at Greta's house, which she narrated to her mother in great detail, while Lena listened and nodded and made the appropriate noises of sympathy. The grievance involved a game, a rule that Mara felt had been applied unfairly, and a piece of bread that she believed she had deserved and had not received. It was, by any objective standard, a small grievance. Mara did not experience grievances as small. At some point, mid-narration, she turned to Dominic, who was standing near the supply building door reviewing a schedule, and said, "Don't you think that's unfair?" He looked at her small, serious face. He thought about the facts as presented. "What was the rule?" he asked. Mara told him the rule. "And you broke it?" he said. "Yes," Mara admitted, with the honest directness of a child who had not yet learned the art of strategic omission. "But only once. Then the rule was applied correctly," he said. Mara considered this. She looked at her mother, who had the expression of someone restraining a smile. She looked back at Dominic. "That's what Mama said," she said, with the tone of someone whose argument had been undermined from an unexpected direction. "Your mother is usually right," he said. Mara sighed heavily and sat down on the nearest available surface, which happened to be Dominic's boot. He looked down at the top of her head, resting against his leg, and the feeling in his chest was so immediate and so complete that it required his full attention not to show it. He stood very still. He kept his breathing even. He looked at the schedule in his hands and read not a single line of it. Lena was watching him. When he looked up, she looked away. In the evening, when the crew had packed up and Mara was inside with Greta, and the settlement had begun its quiet shift toward night, Dominic stood at the edge of the market square and thought about the council meeting he had coming in 4 days. He thought about the name Lady Isolde Vey, which had come up twice in recent correspondence, each time in contexts that were not quite direct enough to be an actual suggestion, but were clearly intended to be heard as one. He had not responded to either reference. He would need to, soon. Things left unaddressed had a way of becoming things that were addressed for you, in your absence, by people whose interests were not necessarily yours. He would deal with it. He looked at the stalls, straight and solid, the new frames catching the last of the evening light. He looked at the drainage channel, clean and functional, doing exactly what it was supposed to do. He thought about a child sitting on his boot with the proprietorial ease of someone who has decided you are safe. He thought about a woman who planned around the assumption that he might not come, and still sent messages to his steward about roof beams because the settlement needed it done. He thought about the word reliable, and what it meant to earn it. He folded his schedule and put it in his pocket. Tomorrow he would ride back to Iron Peak and deal with the council correspondence and the political arrangements that had been allowed to drift too long without correction. He would do this clearly and directly, without leaving room for misunderstanding. And then he would come back here. Not for settlement reviews, not for structural assessments, not for anything except the fact that this was the place his wolf had woken up, and the woman who had woken it had told him to figure out if it was real, and he had, and the answer was yes. He had spent 7 years being very certain of himself. He was, he thought, about to do something deeply uncertain for the first time in a very long time. He found that he was not afraid of it. That, itself, told him something. He thought about what uncertainty used to feel like, before the war, before Seraphine, in the days when he was young enough that not knowing how things would turn out was still a form of adventure. He had been a different person then. Not worse, not better, just less defined by the particular kind of weight that losing someone put on you. The weight was real. He had not regretted carrying it. but he was beginning to understand that carrying it indefinitely had become its own kind of choice, one he had made without admitting he was making it. The choice now was different. He pulled out the border reports and tried again to read them. He managed 2 pages before his attention drifted. That was better than the previous attempt. His wolf was still humming, low and steady, the way it had been humming since the afternoon in the square. He had made his decision. The wolf seemed to approve, or at least, the wolf seemed less interested in making its presence felt now that the direction had been set, as though it had been trying to point him somewhere, and was satisfied now that the pointing had worked. He supposed he could not be too critical of the method. It had been effective. He set the reports down and looked at the ceiling for a while longer, and then he did something he had not done in a very long time. He went to the shelf near his window where he kept the few personal things he allowed in his workroom: a carved piece of driftwood from the coast, a coin from the old Eastern currency, a photograph of his mother that he did not display anywhere else because he wanted it where he could see it without anyone asking, and he set the drawing of the special well there, beside the photograph. He stepped back and looked at it. The large purple shape, the round well, the small figures at the edges. He thought, drainage first, then the rest. He went to bed. He slept for the first time in 10 days without standing at the window first. Lady Isolde Vey arrived in Millhaven on a Tuesday morning, unannounced, in a carriage with the Vey family crest on the door, and 4 outriders, who were very clearly meant to be noticed. She was 26 years old, beautiful in the precise and deliberate way of someone who has made beauty a tool, and she moved through the settlement's market square, with the particular ease of a woman who was accustomed to every room adjusting itself to her presence. She wore traveling clothes that were more expensive than anything Millhaven's market had ever stocked. She smiled at everyone. She also looked at everything the way you look at things you are assessing rather than appreciating. Lena saw her from across the square, and knew, immediately and with great certainty, exactly who she was. Not because she recognized her. She had never seen Lady Isolde in person. She knew her, the way you know a category. The shape of it, the purpose of it, the particular combination of beauty and calculation that announced itself clearly to anyone who had ever had to understand which forces in a room were going to affect their life. She kept working. The carriage had arrived 2 days before Dominic was expected. This was, Lena thought, probably intentional. It gave Lady Isolde time to move through the settlement, to be seen and known and established as a presence, before the Alpha King arrived, and the reason for the visit became impossible to misread. Greta came to find Lena at midday. She sat down across from her in the supply building and said, without preamble, "You know who she is." "Yes," Lena said. "She's been asking about the reconstruction." Very polite. Very interested. Greta's tone made it clear she was not using interested as a compliment. "She's been asking about you." Lena put down her pencil. "What has she been asking?" "How long you've been managing the market, whether you have family here. Whether you were born Pack or—" Greta paused. She asked whether Mara's father was Pack-born. Lena was quiet for a moment. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her that wasn't a question she needed the answer to." Lena looked at her. She felt a complicated warmth, not for herself but for Greta, who had been managing difficult people and difficult conversations in this settlement for 40 years, and had never once softened a boundary to make someone comfortable. "It doesn't matter," Lena said. "She's right to be here. She's right to be interested." "Lena." "She is, Greta. I know what I am. I know what she is. Those are just facts." "Facts don't get to be the whole of it," Greta said, with some sharpness. "What he does about those facts is what matters." Lena said nothing. She picked up her pencil and looked at the numbers in front of her without reading them. She had been doing this, not thinking about it, for several days now. She had been very disciplined about it. Dominic Voss came to Millhaven, and things happened when he was there. Things she felt and noticed and did not examine too closely. And then he left, and she put it all away and got on with the work and kept the work in the front of her mind, where it couldn't leave room for other things. She was good at this. She had been good at it her whole life. Put the feeling in the back. Do the work. Do not give the feeling room to grow until you know what it's going to do when it grows. The problem was that she did know what it was going to do. She knew what it already was. Mara made things harder, as Mara made everything harder in the most specific and loving way possible. Mara had not been told to. and would not have done so if she had been told, and as a result, she had formed a complete and uncomplicated attachment to Dominic in the space of several visits that had expressed itself in various concrete ways: the riding glove, the drawing of the special well, the habit of appearing at his elbow whenever he was in the square, and providing running commentary on whatever he was doing. He had, in Mara's assessment, passed every test that Mara had. This was not nothing. Mara's tests were not easy. Lena understood, sitting in the supply building with Greta watching her, that she was going to have to make some decisions. Not tomorrow. Not at the end of this week. Now. Because Lady Isolde was in her market square, and Dominic was arriving in 2 days, and the shape of what was happening was too clear to pretend it wasn't there. "I'm going to pull back," Lena said. Greta was quiet. "Not completely. He's coming on settlement business and I'll be here for that. But I'm not going to." She stopped, started again. "I'm not going to be something that makes this more complicated for him than it needs to be." "You're not a complication," Greta said. "I am," Lena said, not cruelly but honestly. "In the context of what his council wants from him, I'm exactly a complication. I'm human-blooded. I'm border settlement. I have a child with no pack father. Lady Isolde is none of those things." She looked at her pencil. "I'm not saying it's fair. I'm saying it's what's true." Greta was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "And if he makes a different choice?" Lena thought about the afternoon 4 days ago, when Mara had sat on his boot. She thought about the way he had stood very still, and not moved, and looked at the schedule in his hand without reading it. "Then that's his choice to make," she said, "not mine to push toward." She went back to her numbers. Lady Isolde came to speak with her the following afternoon. She did it gracefully, which Lena had expected. She came to the supply building under the pretext of asking about the market's produce sources, because she was staying through the week, and would need to direct her staff to appropriate suppliers. It was a sensible reason to have a conversation, completely plausible, and they both knew it was not the actual reason for the conversation. Lena answered the produce questions precisely and helpfully, and watched Isolde arrange herself in the chair across from her, with the ease of someone who was always comfortable and always in control. "You've done remarkable work here," Isolde said, looking around the supply building. "The reconstruction is impressive." "The materials came from the pack stores," Lena said. "The crew did the work. But the planning came from you," Greta told me. She smiled. It was a good smile. Warm enough, practiced enough. "The Alpha King speaks highly of your work as well." Lena looked at her. "He's been supportive of the settlement's development. We're grateful." "He's been very present here," Isolde said, conversationally. "More so than one might expect, given the range of his responsibilities." Lena held her gaze. "Millhaven is a priority settlement. The border situation makes it strategically important." "Yes." A pause. "Of course." They looked at each other. The real conversation took place in the space between what they were saying, the way conversations between two intelligent women often do. Isolde was not threatening her. She was not being cruel. She was being exactly what she was, a woman in a position of significantly more power and standing than Lena's, gently making sure that Lena understood the map. Lena understood the map. She had always understood the map. "Is there anything else you needed for the supply list?" Lena asked. Isolde looked at her for a moment longer, a look that was, Lena thought, almost respectful, or at least something adjacent to it. "No," she said. "That was everything. Thank you." She left. Lena sat in the supply building for a moment in the quiet after she was gone, and then she stood up and went back to work, because the market stalls needed restocking, and the grain order needed revising, and Mara would need dinner in 2 hours. The quiet in her chest was something she had expected. She had been managing it for a week. It was manageable. Dominic arrived 2 days later. He came in the early afternoon, and Lena was in the storeroom when she heard the settlement's ambient sound shift in the way it always did. She stayed in the storeroom. She finished what she was doing. She came out when she was ready, which was a small thing, but small things were what she had. She saw him across the square. He had seen her. She knew it from the slight direction of his attention. But he was speaking with the settlement elder and his beta, and a man from his planning office, and he did not come over immediately. Isolde was standing near the eastern fence, speaking with one of the outriders, positioned in a way that gave her a clear view of the square and a natural occasion to cross it in any direction at short notice. She was dressed in pale blue. She looked, in the afternoon light, exactly as she was meant to look. Lena went back inside. She told herself this was sensible. She told herself she was not hurt by it. She told herself that she had expected this, and had made a clear-eyed decision, and that clear-eyed decisions were not supposed to hurt. They were supposed to be clear. She was chopping carrots for the evening meal when she heard his footsteps. She had learned his footsteps. That was a new development, and an inconvenient one. He stopped in the doorway of the storeroom. "You've been avoiding me," he said. She kept chopping. "I've been working. Since I arrived, you've been in here. There's inventory to do." He came in. He did not ask permission, but he was that kind of person. The kind who moved into spaces because they intended to be in them, not because they were testing a limit. He stood near the shelves and looked at her. "Lena." She put down the knife. She turned and looked at him. She had promised herself she would not manage her expression too much, because managed expressions were a form of hiding, and she had decided not to hide. So she just looked at him, with whatever was on her face, and waited. "What happened?" he said. "Lady Isolde arrived," she said. He went quiet. "She's very lovely," Lena said. "And she's Pack, and she's the right rank. And I imagine the council has been watching what happens here, and has sent a very clear message about what would be appropriate." She held his gaze. "I'm not angry about any of that. I just thought it was better to be less present while you figure out what you're doing." He was looking at her with something in his face that was very still and very focused. "I haven't invited her here," he said. "I know. These things don't require an invitation. I don't want her here. Dominic. I came to Millhaven again because of you," he said. Not loudly, quietly, the way he said everything that mattered. "Not for the drainage or the fence or the supply review. You know that." She looked at him. Her chest was doing something that she could not fully contain. "I have Mara," she said. "I've told you that." "I know. And I'm not pack-ranked, and I'm not politically useful, and I come with a life, a whole life that was already here before you arrived. I'm not going to fit neatly into whatever is expected of you." "I know," he said. "And that's not easy, what I just described. That's genuinely complicated." "I know," he said, for the third time. "Lena, I know all of that. I have known all of that. I went home and thought about all of that, and I made a decision." She was quiet. "I'm not asking you to believe that decision immediately. I'm not asking you to adjust your whole life around a decision you don't trust yet. I'm asking you to give me the chance to make it real, instead of just something I said." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about Greta's voice. What he does about those facts is what matters. "I have one condition," she said. "Tell me. Mara doesn't get hurt. Whatever happens between us, however this goes, Mara doesn't get hurt by it. If you're going to be in her life, you're in it properly and consistently, or you're not in it at all." "Agreed," he said, without hesitation. "I mean it, Dominic." "I know you do," he said. "That's why I agreed without hesitation." She looked at him for one more long moment. Then she picked up the knife and turned back to the carrots. "Dinner is at 6 if you're staying," she said. A pause. "I'm staying," he said. She did not turn around. But something in her settled that had been unsettled since the carriage with the family crest had pulled into the market square, and the chopping was steady and even, and she did not examine what the settling meant. Not yet, but she was aware of it. She was aware of it for the rest of the evening. He stayed for dinner. They ate in the kitchen, just the three of them, because Greta had retired early, and it was a quiet evening in the settlement. Mara sat between them and narrated several things that had happened during the day, with the thoroughness of a reporter who believes all details are equally important. The small hen had gone into the western stall without permission. The stall owner had been annoyed. Mara had observed this and had conclusions. "She should have just let her be there," Mara said. "The hen wasn't hurting anything." "The stall owner has a right to manage what's in his stall," Lena said. Mara looked at Dominic for a second opinion. "Your mother is right," he said. "But I understand the hen's perspective." Mara considered this, and appeared to find it satisfying as a compromise. After dinner, Mara was put to bed in the usual way, which involved the usual negotiations. Lena came back to the kitchen and sat down across from him, and they talked. About the settlement, about the schedule for the remaining fence work, about a supply problem in the Northern Territory that had nothing to do with either of them but that he mentioned because she was the person he most wanted to think through problems with. He had realized this at some point in the past several weeks, and had not yet entirely adjusted to it. She listened. She asked 2 questions that were good questions. She pointed out a supply allocation pattern he had not noticed. He stayed later than was practical. When he finally stood up to leave, she walked him to the door and leaned against the frame in the way she had the first night, the way she had of occupying a doorway, as though it were a proper place to stand, complete and comfortable. "Thank you for staying," she said. "Thank you for dinner," he said. She looked at him with the direct gaze that never quite softened, but had, over the weeks, become something he looked for. "The offer stands," she said. "You're always welcome. You don't need a logistics reason." He held that. He knew what it cost her to say it. Lena did not make offers easily. Everything she said had been considered first. "I know," he said. "Thank you." He walked back to where his men were camped on the settlement's edge. The night was clear and cold, and the stars were bright over the flat land. He walked slowly, which was not something he usually did. He thought, "She said I was always welcome." He thought, "She said I did not need a logistics reason." He thought about 7 years of standing at windows, and what it meant that the person he most wanted to think through problems with was standing in a kitchen doorway, in a border settlement, and that she had just told him he was welcome there. He walked into the quiet of the night, and his wolf was steady in his chest, and the stars were very bright, and everything that had been complicated for 7 years felt, just for a moment, remarkably simple. The council chamber in Iron Peak was built to make a point. It had been built 300 years ago, when the first Alpha King had wanted his advisors to feel the weight of the decisions they made, and it had done that job well ever since. The ceiling was very high, and the stone was very old, and the light came through narrow windows at an angle that fell on the table rather than on the faces of the people sitting at it, which meant that when the Alpha King looked at his council, he saw their features in shadow. Dominic had always found this useful. He called the meeting 3 days after returning from Millhaven. He had spent those 3 days working through the border intelligence reports with his general staff, reviewing supply requisitions, and dealing with 36 messages that had accumulated in his absence. Because 6 visits to Millhaven in 5 weeks, regardless of how they were framed, had not gone unnoticed by anyone who paid attention to the Alpha King's movements. He did not address the elephant in the room first. He was not a man who addressed elephants first. He went through the council's current business methodically: the Eastern supply route dispute, the harvest assessments from the Northern Territories, the recruitment numbers for the spring patrol cycle. He gave each item its proper attention. He made decisions where decisions were needed. When the operational business was finished, he set his papers flat on the table and looked at his council. There were 7 of them. He knew them all very well, in the way you know people you have worked beside through wars and crises and the ordinary long grind of keeping things running. He knew which ones led from principle, which from habit, and which from calculation. He knew which ones would tell him what they actually thought, and which ones would tell him what they believed he wanted to hear. He knew all of them well enough to know that the careful stillness in the room, now that the agenda items were done, was not coincidence. "Millhaven," he said. The stillness sharpened slightly. Cale Vaspar spoke first. He usually did. He was 41 years old, dark-haired and quiet-spoken, and he had been on Dominic's council since the year after the border wars. He had also been Seraphine's older brother, and Dominic had kept him on the council, not out of sentiment, but because Cale was one of the 2 or 3 people in the room who could be relied upon to say what he believed to be true, regardless of whether anyone wanted to hear it. "You've been to Millhaven 6 times in 5 weeks, Cale said. "Yes," Dominic said. "And Lady Isolde Vey was also in Millhaven this week." "Yes, not at my invitation." A pause. Cale was good at pauses. "The family sent her independently." "It appears so." Another council member, Harkin, the oldest of them, practical and blunt in the way of men who have spent a long career being tired of wasted time, said, "What exactly is happening in Millhaven, Dominic?" Dominic looked at him. "A market manager named Lena Ashvale has been managing that settlement better than 3 of our designated administrators manage theirs. The reconstruction work there is now a model I intend to apply to 4 other border settlements. And my wolf has woken. He said the last thing in the same tone as the first 2, not dramatically, just as a fact in a line of facts. The quality of the silence that followed was different from the careful silence before. Harkin said, after a moment, "Your wolf." "Yes." Cale had not said anything. He was looking at the table. His expression was something Dominic could not read clearly from across the room, though he was trying. "The woman," said another council member, Petra, who handled territorial law and had an instinct for the political edges of anything, "is human-blooded." "Her father's line is human," Dominic agreed. "She has pack sensitivity, but no shift. And a child. From a previous relationship, the child is 4 years old, and her name is Mara. And the bond. My wolf recognizes her," Dominic said. "I am not asking the council's opinion on whether that is the right or appropriate thing to have happened. I am telling you as a fact so that we can have an honest conversation about what it means." Petra looked at him. She was one of the better ones, in his assessment. She served the law rather than her own interests, which was rarer than it should have been. "The council has no authority over who the Alpha King forms a bond with," she said. "That has never been law. It has been assumption." "Then let us be clear about that," Dominic said. Harkin said, "The Vey family will not be pleased." "The Vey family made assumptions that were not supported by anything I said to them," Dominic said. "I have nothing to apologize to them for. That doesn't mean the political cost is 0. "No," Dominic agreed. "It isn't 0. I'm aware of that." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Cale looked up. He had been silent for this entire exchange, and everyone at the table had noticed, because Cale's silence always meant something was being processed. "I'd like to speak with the Alpha King privately," he said. "After this meeting." Everyone else at the table registered this with various degrees of visible interest. "Agreed," Dominic said. The rest of the meeting handled the last few items on the agenda and then dispersed. The council filed out in 1s and 2s, and Dominic watched them go and read the room in the particular way he had developed over years of rule, seeing who spoke to whom on the way to the door, who avoided making eye contact with him, who was already doing the calculation of what this meant for their particular area of concern. Most of them would accept it. They might not like it initially, but they would accept it because they were pragmatic people who understood that the Alpha King's bond was not a political variable they had the standing to contest. A few would not be happy. He would deal with the few. He watched Harkin leave, with the particular set of his shoulders that meant he was already drafting a memo in his head. He watched Petra speak quietly to one of the junior council members near the door, almost certainly about the legal implications. He watched the 2 council members who had said the least during the meeting leave quickly and separately, which usually meant they needed to compare notes before they decided where they stood. Dominic knew his council. He had chosen most of them himself, over the years, for specific qualities. He had made mistakes sometimes, people who seemed one thing and turned out to be another. But mostly he had chosen well. Mostly they were people who, when they understood the map clearly, would find the right path on it. He had just shown them the map, clearly and without softening. Now he waited to see which of them read it correctly. When the chamber was empty, Cale closed the door and came back to the table and sat down, not in his council chair, but in the one nearest to Dominic, which was different, the posture of someone who was not speaking as a council member. He did not say anything for a moment. Dominic waited. He had known Cale for 9 years. He had sat with him through the worst night of both their lives, the night Seraphine died, in the silence that follows the thing you cannot fix. He trusted this man in a way that did not require words to establish. "She was going to be angry at you," Cale said finally. Dominic looked at him. "Seraphine. She would have been furious." His voice was quiet and steady, the way it was when he was managing something difficult. "She found waste. She found it intolerable. She used to say that the worst thing a person could do was stop living because something terrible had happened, because then the terrible thing had taken twice as much as it should have." Dominic did not speak. 7 years, Cale said. "I watched you function perfectly for 7 years. You ran the territories. You kept everything going. You became what people say you are, the Iron Alpha, all of that. And I knew, because I knew her, that she would have been so angry at you for it. I was taking care of what I was responsible for. Dominic said. I know. You were also punishing yourself. You know you were. Dominic was quiet. Your wolf waking up? Cale said. It's not betrayal. It's proof. It's proof that you still have a life to live. He stopped. He looked at the table for a moment. She loved you. She loved you more than she was easy about it. And that was, she did not love easily, my sister. You know that. And she would want you to have this. Whatever this is, she would be angry if you didn't. The room was very quiet. Dominic had not spoken about Seraphine in a long time, not in any way that was honest. He had spoken about her in official contexts, in the memorial address at the anniversary ceremony, in the formal language of a leader acknowledging loss. He had not spoken about her in the language of a man who had held her hand while she died, and then spent 7 years turning his grief into iron and calling it strength. I know, he said. It was not enough. But Cale nodded, as though it was. Tell me about her, he said. The woman in Millhaven. So Dominic told him. Not all of it, not the moment in the market square, with the laugh and the drawing, and the way his wolf had risen like something coming back from the cold, but the outline of it, the directness, the drainage order, the way she managed the settlement, the way she talked about Mara. Cale listened to all of it. When Dominic finished, he said, She sounds like someone who has been carrying things alone for a long time. She has. And she's careful. Careful doesn't cover it. She's measured. She plans for the possibility that I won't come. She sends messages to my steward about roof beams because she won't assume I'll handle it. Cale nodded slowly. She's protecting herself. Yes. And the child. Particularly the child. Cale looked at him. What are you going to do about the council pressure? I'm going to address it directly. Whatever arrangements have been assumed regarding the Vey family, they were never formal. I'll make clear that there's no arrangement. The political cost is manageable. And Lady Isolde was used by her family to send a message that had nothing to do with her own wishes. I have some sympathy for her. The message won't work. Cale was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up. Good, he said. It was a single word, and it carried a great deal. They walked out of the council chamber together. The corridor was quiet, the late afternoon light coming sideways through the high windows. At the end of the corridor, where their paths divided, Cale stopped. Dominic, he said. Dominic turned. She would have liked that the wolf woke up for someone who sends notes to your steward about roof beams, he said. Seraphine would have appreciated that. He walked away down his corridor. Dominic stood in the empty hallway and felt the something in his chest. The complicated, unnamed thing that had been building since the morning in the market square. Shift, again, into something that had a little less grief in it, and a little more room. He went to his desk and drafted 2 letters, one to the Vey family, clear and final, and one to his steward about the arrangements needed to properly recognize Millhaven's new status in the territory structure. The first letter was harder. He wrote it carefully and sent it that evening. The second letter was not hard at all. When it was done, he sat in the quiet of his study and thought about Mara sitting on his boot, and Lena at the counter saying dinner is at 6 if you're staying, and the way she had not turned around to see whether he would stay, because she had already said what she had to say, and the rest was his to decide. He was in the room when the reply came back from his steward about Millhaven. He read it, and then sat with the quiet for a while, which was something he did not usually allow himself. He was a man of action and decision, and he had always been comfortable with that. Sitting with the quiet was not a skill he had practiced. He was practicing it now. Outside the window, the hills of Iron Peak were turning gold in the evening light. He had watched these hills through this window for 7 years. They had been the same every time. Beautiful, solid, his. They were his. This was his life, the territory and the council, and the responsibilities that did not end, and the window he stood at when things were heavy. And also, now, something else. Something that had walked across a market square with a set jaw, and told him he was working in the wrong order. He thought about Cale's voice in the corridor. She would have liked that the wolf woke for someone who sends notes about roof beams. He thought about Seraphine, not the way he usually thought about her, from behind the glass of careful distance, but more directly. He thought about the person she had been, the specific fact of her sharp honesty, her dislike of waste, the way she had moved through a room like someone who had already decided where she was going, and was simply walking there. He missed her. He would always miss her. That was not going to change, and he did not expect it to. And he had made a kind of peace with that fact that did not require the missing to disappear, but simply required him to carry it without letting it carry him. Cale had said, "It is the proof that you are still alive." He was still alive. He stood up from the desk and went to the shelf by the window. The drawing of the special well was there, next to his mother's photograph, slightly crinkled at one corner from being carried in his jacket. He looked at it for a moment. A child who gave things to people she had decided to keep. A woman who fixed drainage before roofs, who planned around absences she expected but did not want to expect, who said what was true even when it was not comfortable. He would ride back to Millhaven in 4 days. He was already certain of it. He was also, for the first time in 7 years, uncertain in a way that was not the bad kind of uncertain. Not the uncertainty of a man who has lost his footing, but the uncertainty of a man who has found a direction and does not yet know everything the path holds, and finds that this is, against all expectation, something that feels like being alive. He went back to his desk. He had decisions to make, and they no longer felt like weights. Mara had known for a while. Not in the way adults know things, with words attached, with reasoning, with the ability to explain to someone else what you have figured out and how. She knew it the way children know things that are in the air around them, as a feeling that lived in the way the settlement had changed, in the way her mother moved differently when a certain person was nearby, in the particular quality of the silence that followed when that person left. She had told Greta about it in her own terms, which had been fairly direct. "Mama likes the tall man," she had said, on a morning when Greta was braiding her hair, and they had the kitchen to themselves. "Does she?" said Greta, in the tone adults use when they want to hear more without asking for more. "She doesn't say so," Mara said, "but she thinks about him when he's not here." "How do you know?" Mara considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "She gets a certain face," she said. "The same face she gets when she thinks about the drainage before it was fixed. Like there's something that needs doing." Greta had pulled her into a hug after that, which was something Greta did when she found something either very funny or very dear, and Mara had not been sure which one applied here, but she had accepted the hug because Greta's hugs were good. Mara also knew, though she did not have words for this part, that the tall man liked her mother. She knew it from the way he watched her mother when her mother was not watching him, a particular kind of attention that Mara associated with the way people looked at things they wanted to keep. She had seen it from Greta's husband, looking at Greta. She had seen it from the baker looking at his fresh bread in the morning. She had now seen it from the tall man looking at her mother across the market square. She approved of this. She had decided she approved of him on the 3rd visit, when he had told her that the rule about the bread had been applied correctly. Mara had very strong feelings about people who were honest with her even when it was not the answer she wanted. Her mother was honest with her. Greta was honest with her. Most other adults told her what they thought she wanted to hear, which she found deeply unsatisfying. The tall man told her the truth. This was important. He also let her sit on his boot without making it into a thing, which was also important. A lot of adults made things into things. They fussed, they commented, they drew attention to small actions in ways that made those actions feel larger and more significant than they were. He had simply stood very still and looked at his schedule and let her be there, which was exactly the right response. She had also noticed the way he folded the drawing of the special well carefully and put it inside his jacket, and she did not say anything about it, but she had noticed it very specifically. She knew, on the day he came back after the gap and she saw her mother in the storeroom, and the tall man go in after her, that something was happening. She was not allowed to go to the storeroom when her mother was having a grown-up conversation. She had tested this rule once, and the consequences had been sufficiently uncomfortable that she had not tested it again. She waited outside. When he came out, she was sitting on the crate nearest the storeroom door. He looked down at her, with the expression he sometimes had, the careful, uncertain one, like a person who was paying very close attention to rules they were not entirely sure of. "Hello," she said. "Hello," he said. "Is she okay?" He looked at her. Something moved in his expression. "Yes," he said. "She's okay." Mara considered him for a moment. "Are you staying for dinner?" "Yes." She nodded. This was the correct answer. "Mama is making the carrots," she told him. "She chops them very small. I don't like big carrot pieces." I'll keep that in mind, he said. You don't have to keep it in mind, Mara said, practical as ever. She already knows. She jumped off the crate and went to help set the table, leaving him standing in the corridor with whatever it was he was feeling, which Mara could see was quite a lot, but which she had decided was his to manage. She had done her part. Dinner that evening was a small thing, and a significant one. There were 4 of them: Lena, Mara, Dominic, and Riker, who had been gently inserted into the evening by Mara, on the grounds that he was also there, and it would be rude not to include him. Riker had accepted this with the expression of a man who was trying not to look as pleased as he was. The table was the small one in Lena's kitchen, the one that usually had only 2 chairs, but to which Greta had contributed 2 more, because Greta noticed everything and prepared for it without making a production of the preparation. Mara sat between her mother and Dominic, which was where she had placed herself before anyone else could sit down. She had views about seating arrangements, and had acted on them before the adults had a chance to think about it. The conversation was ordinary. It was about the settlement, and the upcoming supply delivery and the weather, which had been getting colder in the evenings and suggested an early autumn. Riker contributed a story about a supply route mishap that was mildly funny and completely unimportant, and Lena laughed at it genuinely, and Dominic watched her laugh with the expression Mara had catalogued earlier as the wanting to keep something expression. Mara ate her carrots. After dinner, Riker was recruited by Greta, who had appeared at the door with the timing of someone who had been waiting for exactly the right moment, for a conversation about the Western fence repair logistics. Riker went, with the air of a man who knew he was being moved out of the way, and was entirely comfortable with that. Mara was supposed to go to bed. She had a system for not going to bed immediately, which involved finding reasons to be in the kitchen that were plausible enough that her mother could not technically object to them without making a point of it. Tonight the system worked for approximately 12 minutes, during which she organized the dish shelf, retrieved a cup of water she did not need, and explained to the tall man the rules she had established for the 3 hens that wandered the market square. The brown one is the fastest, she said. The gray one gives up quickest. The small one doesn't really want to be caught. She just likes the attention. How do you know? He said. She always lets you get close. She just doesn't let you actually catch her. Mara considered. She's very smart. Or she's learned that being caught isn't worth it, he said. Mara thought about this. Maybe, she said. Or maybe she likes the game more than she would like being caught. He looked at her with the full attention expression. That's a very good observation. I know, Mara agreed. Then Lena appeared in the kitchen doorway, with the particular expression that meant the system had run its course, and Mara made the appropriate sounds of protest, and was moved, firmly, and with some affection, toward her room. Lena came in to read to her, which was the ritual, and Mara listened to half the story, and then said, from the edge of sleep, Mama. I like when he's here. Lena was quiet for a moment. Go to sleep, Mara. Okay, Mara said, and did. The conversation that followed, in the kitchen, was one that Mara did not hear, and was not meant to hear, but which had been in the air between them all evening. Dominic was still at the table. Lena came back into the kitchen and sat down across from him, and they were quiet for a moment in the way of 2 people who are both aware that something needs to be said, and are each waiting for the other to say it. Lena said it. The council meeting. Yes. Did you address it? Yes. She looked at him, and? The formal assumption about the Vey family has been corrected. I sent them a letter. It was clear. He paused. I also had a conversation with Kale Vaspar that I needed to have for some time. Seraphine's brother, she said. He looked at her. You know about her. Everyone knows about her. She's part of how people understand who you are. She held his gaze steadily. I'm not asking you to tell me about her tonight. I'm not asking you to compare or explain. I'm aware that she exists in the history of what I'm potentially part of. I thought you should know I'm aware. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, she would have been angry at me for the last 7 years. I believe that, Lena said. Kale told me so. And he's right. He set his hands flat on the table, a gesture she had seen before, the one that meant he was being direct because he had decided to be. I turned the grief into something that looked like function, and I was good at it, but a life that only functions is not a life. No, she agreed. The wolf woke up, he said, in that square, when Mara laughed. And I have been trying to be honest with myself about what that means, and what I want it to mean, and whether there is a difference. And the conclusion I have arrived at is that I want you in my life, not as something administrative, not as a political arrangement, as yourself. Lena looked at him. She felt the familiar careful management rising, the impulse to put distance between herself and things that could become important, to protect herself, to apply the same practical sense she applied to drainage grades and grain orders and everything else. She let the impulse rise and then set it down. I have conditions, she said. You told me, Mara. More than that. She straightened. I don't leave Millhaven completely. Not yet. Not until I know this is real enough to leave for. I won't uproot Mara's whole life on the basis of a few months and a feeling. Understood. And I need you to be direct with me. Always. If something in your world changes or shifts, I need to know. I have had enough of people who make you feel safe, and then reveal that the safety was not what it seemed. I will be, he said. And Mara meets your world slowly. On her terms. I won't put her in situations before she has the tools to handle them. Agreed. She held his gaze. And I need time. I know what I feel. I'm not pretending I don't know. But knowing what you feel, and trusting it are different things. And I need time between them. He nodded. I know. He looked at her. For what it's worth, I'm not going anywhere. Time is not a problem. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the riding glove on a fence post. She thought about the drawing in the inside pocket of his jacket. She thought about the carrot pieces chopped small, because Mara didn't like big ones, and the fact that he had taken note of something so specific when she had not been looking. Okay, she said. It was the same word Mara had used to him 3 weeks ago, in that direct and uncomplicated way. He recognized it for what it was. Lena could see that. Not a commitment to everything, but a door, left open, between this moment and what came next. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, she said. Just be what you said you'll be. I will. They sat in the kitchen for a while longer, drinking tea that had gone a little cold, talking about the northern supply routes and the autumn weather, and what Mara had been like as a very small baby, which had come up as a result of a story about the East Gate, that had somehow become a story about Mara's first attempt at walking, which had involved several falls, and a determination that had left Lena laughing and crying at the same time, as some moments do. Dominic listened to all of it. He did not rush anything, or try to make the conversation be something it wasn't. He just sat at the small kitchen table in the border settlement, with the lamp between them and the night outside, and paid the kind of attention that made you feel like everything you said was worth saying. When he left, it was late. Mara was long asleep. The settlement was quiet. He said goodnight at the door, and she said goodnight, and he walked back toward where his men were staying, and Lena closed the door and stood with her back against it for a moment, in the dark hallway. She thought about the small hen in the market square, the smart one, who let you get close but never quite let you catch her, who liked the game and the attention, but kept the catching on her own terms. She thought she might understand that hen better than she used to. She went to bed. She did not lie awake long. There was something different in the not lying awake, something that had released, slightly, like a knot that had not been untied but had been loosened enough that it no longer pulled. She did not have a word for it yet. She thought she might, soon. In the morning, Mara woke early and came to find her, as she always did, with a list of requirements for the day that she delivered standing in the doorway of Lena's room, with the serious efficiency of someone who had given this list considerable thought. The list was, breakfast with the bread from yesterday, a visit to the chickens, permission to show Dominic the chickens if he was still here, and an answer to a question about whether chickens could understand what you said to them, or just the feeling of what you said. Lena addressed the items in order. Breakfast was yes. The chickens were yes. Whether Dominic was still here she could not answer with certainty, but probably. The chicken question she thought about genuinely for a moment, and then said, probably the feeling more than the words, but the feeling is not nothing. Mara found this satisfying and went to get dressed. Lena lay in her bed for another 2 minutes, which was all she allowed herself, and thought about the evening, the conversation that had not been easy, and the one that had been unexpectedly easy, and the moment at the table when Dominic had told her about the window, about standing at the window, and what she had heard in that telling. She had heard someone who had been alone, in a way that looked, from the outside, like self-sufficiency. She recognized it. She had been doing the same thing. Two people who had learned to stand at their own windows. One of them had learned to put it down. She was not quite sure she had learned that yet. But she thought she was learning. She got up and went to make breakfast, and the morning was ordinary and bright, and Mara had strong opinions about how the bread should be cut, and somewhere in the settlement, Dominic was probably also having a morning, which was a fact that did not require her to do anything with it, except acknowledge that it was there. She acknowledged it. She cut the bread the way Mara wanted. It was, she thought, a beginning. The alarm sounded at 4 in the morning. It was not the formal alarm bell. That was for fires. And what woke Lena was something different. It was the dog at the settlement's eastern edge, barking in a way that was not its usual bark. She had lived in Millhaven her whole life, and she knew every sound it made, at every hour of every night. And this one landed in her chest like a stone thrown into still water. She was on her feet before the sound finished. She dressed in the dark. She had a system for this. She had developed it 2 years ago after the first round of rogue incursions, when she had spent a panicked few minutes looking for her boots in the wrong order, during an emergency that had not required her boots at all, and she had decided that was unacceptable. The system meant she could be dressed and moving in under 2 minutes. She went to Mara's room first. This was not negotiable. Mara was asleep, curled on her side with her hair everywhere, making the specific small sound she made when she was deeply under. Lena stood in the doorway for 3 seconds, long enough to verify, not long enough to be delayed, and then moved through the house to the window that faced east. The tree line was wrong. It was dark, but not completely dark. There was enough moon to see the shapes at the settlement's edge, and the shapes were wrong. Movement that did not belong to animals. Figures at the perimeter fence. Not 1 or 2, several. She went to the horn on the shelf beside the door. Greta had made her hang it there after the second incursion, arguing that emergencies had a way of being urgent, and she did not want Lena looking for equipment, and she sounded it. 3 short blasts, then 2. The Millhaven signal for a perimeter breach. She heard the settlement wake up. Then she did the thing she had thought through and planned for and had hoped she would never have to do. She went through the settlement to the reinforced storage building, moving quickly, going to every door she knew had children sleeping behind it, and knocking in the specific way she had taught every family to recognize. And when each door opened, she said the same 3 words, "South Building, now," and moved to the next. People came, half-dressed, holding their children, moving fast and quiet. She counted them as they filed into the storage building, the building she had fought for, 2 years ago, before the first incursions, when she had stood in front of the settlement planning meeting and argued for a reinforced room with an iron latch and thick walls, and Greta had backed her, and it had been built, and she had been very grateful for it every day since. She got the last family in, and pulled the iron latch, and then went outside and moved north, because there was more to do. The settlement's men were at the perimeter. She could hear fighting. Not close, not yet inside. The particular sound of a confrontation at the fence line, controlled and fast. She moved through the market square, in the dark, toward the well at the center, where she had a clear line of sight to all 4 compass points. She saw Riker first. He was at the western fence with 2 other men, and his attention was fully on the fight at the perimeter, which meant the breach was still outside. Should. She turned east. She saw Dominic. He had shifted. She had not seen him shift before. She had known, abstractly, what he was. What all the packborn were. The animal inside them that was as real as the person. But knowing and seeing were different, and she stood in the dark market square for a moment, and was still. He was large. Much larger than she would have expected, though she could not have said what she expected. The wolf was gray-dark, and moved with a focus, and an absolute certainty that was different from anything she had seen before. Not angry in the way she would have described anger. Something more fundamental than that. Something that said, very clearly, this is the line, and nothing crosses it. She dragged her attention back to what she needed to do. She was not packborn, and she could not shift, and she was not going to be useful in the fight at the perimeter. What she was going to be useful for was everything else. The people in the south building, the supply access if anyone was injured, the organization of the aftermath. She went to the supply building and got the first aid materials she kept there. She had put them there deliberately, 2 months ago, after the third incursion had left a man with an injury that had to wait while supplies were retrieved from the far end of the settlement. She brought the kit to the center of the square and set it on the well wall and waited. The fighting at the eastern perimeter lasted 18 minutes. She timed it, not consciously, but because her mind kept count of things, even when she was not directing it to. She stood at the well with the kit and the lamp. She had the lamp low, just enough light to work by, and kept herself from running to the perimeter where the sound was, because running toward a fight when you could not join it was not useful. She kept herself still. After 18 minutes, the sound changed. The particular quality of a confrontation in progress has a sound that is different from the particular quality of a confrontation ending, and she knew the second when she heard it, and she let out a breath she had been holding for a while. Riker appeared from the western path. He was not hurt. He looked at her, and then at the kit on the well wall, and then back at her, with an expression she could not fully read in the low light. "3 of ours need looking at," he said, not badly. "Bring them here," she said. He brought them. She worked quickly and efficiently, with the same focus she brought to inventory and supply schedules, because the focus was the same, a clear task that needed doing, and a set of steps that would get it done. 2 of the injuries were minor. The third needed more careful attention. She gave it careful attention. She was finishing the third when she heard the sound behind her. She turned. Dominic had shifted back. He was standing at the edge of the market square, in the half-dark, and he looked at her, across the space between them, with an expression she could not see clearly enough to read, but she could feel it. She had been getting better at that. She put down the bandaging material and stood up. He crossed the square. He stopped 2 feet from her. He looked at her face, then at the kid on the well wall, then at the 3 men she had treated, then back at her. "Everyone in the south building?" he said. "Yes. 22 people, including 12 children, all accounted for." He was quiet for a moment. "You moved them all yourself?" "I had help." "Lena." His voice was very even and very quiet. "You organized the entire settlement evacuation, while I was at the perimeter." "Someone had to." She looked at him. "The children needed to be inside. The supplies needed to be staged. There's nothing heroic about doing what's necessary." "I know," he said. "That's not what I'm saying." She waited. He looked at her. In the low lamplight, with the sounds of the settlement coming back to itself around them, and the night sky beginning to pale at its far eastern edge, she could see his face clearly enough. The tension in it, not fear. She did not think Dominic Voss experienced fear in the conventional sense, but something close to what people feel when they understand, retroactively, what might have happened, and what did not. "You were in the square," he said, "while the breach was still active. I was at the well. I had a clear line of sight. It's not safe. Dominic," she kept her voice level, "I know this settlement better than anyone alive. I know where every sight line is, and where every shadow falls, and where the ground is uneven, and where a person can see and not be seen. I was not unaware of the risk." He looked at her for a long moment, then he sat down on the low wall of the well, right where the kit had been, and put his arms on his knees and looked at the ground. She sat down beside him, not touching, just beside him. The settlement was doing what settlements did after an emergency, reassembling itself, checking and double-checking, voices calling across the square, as people confirmed everyone was where they should be. The east gate was damaged. That would need attention in the morning. The northern fence had held. The south building had done exactly what it was supposed to do. "Tell me about the pattern," she said after a while. "You've been tracking them for months. This is organized." "Yes," he said. "Someone is directing them." "Yes." "Someone who knows the patrol routes." He looked at her. "You worked that out." "I've been watching the pattern of attacks across the border settlements. The timing is not random. They always hit during a patrol gap. They pull back before the response arrives. That requires information." Riker appeared from the northern path, carrying a report that had clearly been written in the field. He handed it to Dominic and looked at Lena and then away. Dominic read the report. His expression changed. She could not see all the change, but she could see enough. "What?" she said. He looked at her. He appeared to make a decision. "The rogue group that hit tonight is the third in the pattern. We've been tracking them. The intelligence we've gathered indicates they have a coordinator, someone who is giving them timing information. patrol schedules, blind spots. Someone inside the pack, she said. Someone with access to pack information, not necessarily inside Iron Peak itself, but connected. He paused. The Vey family name has appeared in 2 intercepts. She was quiet. It may be coincidence, he said. I am not drawing conclusions yet. But you're not dismissing it. No. She thought about the woman who had come to the market square in pale blue and asked about produce suppliers. She thought about the way she had moved through the settlement, like someone taking stock of it. She thought about the message the carriage with the crest on the door had been intended to send, and the person it had been intended to send it to. The incursions in the border settlements that you've been visiting, she said. Did they begin before or after you started coming to Millhaven? He looked at her sharply. Before. How long before? He was quiet for a moment. Approximately 4 months. She did the math. Around when the council started expecting you to formalize something with the Vey family. He was looking at her with the full attention expression at high intensity. Yes, he said. So someone started destabilizing the border settlements to give you a reason to be occupied with other things. Or demonstrate that the border situation was too serious for personal distractions. She paused. Or both. He was quiet. That is a very significant thing to do, she said. That is not a political inconvenience. That is people in this settlement getting hurt. I know, he said. His voice was not even anymore. I know that. She looked at him. She did not push further. She could see that he was already processing it in the way he processed everything. Systematically. Clearly. With full attention to what it meant and what it required. She put her hand over his. It was the first time she had done that. She did not do it as comfort exactly. Or not only as comfort. She did it because it was what you did when the person beside you was carrying something heavy. He turned his hand and held hers. They sat at the well in the beginning of dawn, while the settlement came back to life around them, and she thought about the storage building standing solid, and the drainage channel full from the night's rain and carrying it away properly, and the fence that had been fixed and held, and all the small decisions made in advance that had meant the emergency was bad but not catastrophic. She thought about the fact that she had not been alone in it. That was the thought she could not quite put away. She had been alone in every previous version of this. Alone in her planning. Alone in the execution. Alone in the aftermath. She had been good at alone. She had made a careful peace with it. But tonight she had stood at the well in the dark, and she had not been alone. And the difference between those two things was larger than she had let herself expect it to be. The sun came up. The sky went from dark to gray to the pale, clear gold of an early morning, after a night of bad weather. Mara would be awake soon, wanting to know everything that had happened, and why she had been in the south building, and when breakfast would be. Lena stood up. She let go of his hand, though not quickly. The east gate needs repair, she said. I'll need to get into the supply store for the materials. I'll have my men start on it this morning, he said. I'll walk through the buildings first. Make sure everyone's okay. Yes. She picked up the first aid kit. She was about to go when he said her name. She turned. He looked at her. The morning light was on his face now, clear and uncomplicated. I'm going to find who did this, he said, and I'm going to stop it. I know, she said. And I'm going to make Millhaven safe enough that you never have to stand at that well in the dark again, because you're the only one thinking clearly. She looked at him for a moment. I'll hold you to that, she said. She walked away, across the market square, in the direction of the south building, where 22 people were waiting to come out into the morning. The latch opened easily. She pulled the iron bar back and swung the door open, and the families came out, blinking in the morning light, the children still drowsy, the adults doing the thing that people do after an emergency has passed and they have been safe and still for several hours. They breathed, and looked, and let the morning be what it was. Lena counted them as they came out. 22 in, 22 out. She knew every face. The older woman who lived beside Greta pressed her hand briefly and said nothing, which was enough. One of the fathers was holding his youngest child, and the child had fallen back asleep on his shoulder, which was the most peaceful thing Lena had seen in the last 8 hours. She sent them back to their homes. She stayed at the south building door until the last family was moving, and then she walked back through the square. Dominic was organizing the post-raid response with his men. Systematic, efficient, the way he did everything. The east gate would be assessed. The perimeter damage would be documented. 2 of the rogue group had been taken into custody. The rest had been driven back over the border. Riker appeared at her elbow. He looked tired in the way people looked when they had been moving fast for several hours on no sleep, and he said, quietly, "Everyone is accounted for. On our side." "Yes," she said, "I counted." He nodded. He looked at her with an expression she recognized, the particular respect that people had for competence in a crisis, which was different from the respect they had for everything else. "You had that building ready before any of us thought about it," he said. "I had it built 2 years ago," she said, "after the first incursion." He was quiet for a moment. "That building saved 12 children's lives last night." "Possibly," she said. "Or the response would have been sufficient without it. We don't know." "I know," he said simply. She looked across the square at Dominic, who had looked up at that moment, and found her already looking. The morning light was clear and uncomplicated between them. She thought about what he had said. "I'm going to make Millhaven safe enough that you never have to stand at that well in the dark again." She believed him. That was the part that surprised her. Not that he had said it, but that she believed him. She had not trusted a promise so quickly in a very long time. She was not sure when the believing had happened. Somewhere between the riding glove and the drawing and the drainage order and the 4 days of reconstruction, and the dinner, and the late evenings, and all the ordinary work done side by side. Somewhere in all of that, she had started believing him. She turned back to what needed doing. The market square needed to be checked. The north fence needed inspection. Greta needed to know that everyone was out of the south building. There was a full morning of aftermath ahead. She went to work. The sun was properly up now, the light turning from pale gold to bright and ordinary, and Millhaven was picking itself up the way it always did, without drama, without performance, one task at a time. She was not alone in that, this morning. She noticed. She did not say anything about it, but she noticed. The evidence came together over 10 days, and it was worse than he had initially suspected. Dominic's intelligence team had been working on the rogue network for months, tracking movement, intercepting communications, mapping the pattern of attacks against settlement locations and patrol schedules. After the night attack on Millhaven, he had redirected every available resource to a single objective: find the source. What they found was a thread, a thin, careful thread that ran from the rogue groups at the border settlements through a series of intermediaries, paid contacts, minor merchants, a supply clerk in the Eastern Territory office, and back to a name. The name was not the Vey family, directly. It was a man named Oliver Brandt, who served on the Territory Council as a junior administrator, and who had, it transpired, been quietly in the service of the Vey family's senior advisor for almost 2 years. Brandt had access to patrol schedules. He had attended enough council meetings to understand the strategic significance of the border settlements. He had been passing information with care and precision, choosing which settlements to target, timing the incursions to maximize disruption, without crossing the line into something that would trigger a full military response. The goal, as far as the intelligence team could determine, had been twofold. First, to keep Dominic focused on border crises rather than personal affairs. Second, to make the border situation look dangerous enough that a strong, politically connected mate would seem like a practical necessity, someone who brought alliances and resources rather than complications. Dominic read the full report at his desk at 11 at night, when the intelligence team's lead officer had finished presenting it and left the room, and the candles had burned low. He sat with it for a while, which was not something he usually did with reports. Then he went to find Riker. Riker was in the map room, which was where he went when he was thinking through logistics. He looked up when Dominic came in and said nothing, because Dominic's expression said everything. "Brandt," Dominic said. "Yes," Riker said. "How long have you suspected?" Riker paused. 3 weeks, since Millhaven. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted to be certain before I put a council member's name in front of you." Riker set down his pen. "And because the Vey connection needed to be established before you moved, or the family would spend the next decade claiming it was a personal vendetta." Dominic was quiet for a moment. "Is Lady Isolde involved?" "No. The intelligence is very clear on that. She was given no details of the arrangement. She was given an opportunity to be seen in the right place at the right time, and she took it, because that is how her family has always operated, but the operational side was kept from her entirely. So she was used. Yes. Dominic sat down. He thought about the woman he had met briefly, who had moved through Millhaven with the ease of someone performing a social strategy she had been given, without being told what it was part of. He thought about how easy it was to be someone else's piece on a board you had not been shown. "What do you need from me to move on, Brandt?" he asked. "Authorization," Riker said, "and a decision on the Vey family. Brandt is removed from the council and faces formal charges. That happens tomorrow." He paused. "The Vey family, the senior advisor who directed this, he faces charges as well. The family itself will be addressed separately. What happened to their people in those settlement raids because of his coordination happened under their family's employment. They are not clean. They will push back. They are welcome to push back through legal process," Dominic said. "That is available to them." Riker nodded. "And Lady Isolde?" Dominic thought about it. "She is cleared. I will say so formally. She was not part of the decision-making. That should be on the record, because I don't want someone paying for a choice they didn't make." Riker looked at him with an expression that was something close to satisfaction, though he did not call it that. "Understood. What else?" "The intelligence on the rogue network is strong enough to dismantle it," Riker said. 3 of the coordination points have been identified. If we move simultaneously on all 3, the network collapses. The groups at the border will lose their direction and their timing, and the patrol teams can handle what's left. When can we be ready? 4 days. 3, Dominic said. Riker looked at him. 3, he agreed. They worked through the night. Dominic had done this before, planned a complex simultaneous operation on short sleep in a map room, with details that needed to be precise because imprecision in this kind of thing cost people. He was good at it. He had done it in the border wars, under worse conditions, with less information. The difference was that this time, at the back of his mind, was Millhaven. Not as distraction, as reason. He had a habit of compartmentalizing, of putting what mattered personally behind a door, and working from the professional side, until the job was done. He had always been able to do this. It was one of the things that made him effective. He was aware, sitting in the map room at 3 in the morning, that the compartment was not as sealed as usual. Not because the personal was leaking into the work, but because the work and the personal were the same thing. What happened in those border settlements was not separate from what was happening to him. It had been made the same thing, by people who thought they could use it. He did not find this clarifying. He found it motivating. The operation went in 3 days later, as scheduled. 3 simultaneous actions at 3 coordination points, fast and clean, and the network that had been directing the rogue groups against the border settlements lost its central function in under 2 hours. No significant injuries on the Iron Peak side. The 3 coordination points were secured. The evidence was overwhelming and was documented immediately. Brandt was taken into formal custody the following morning. He gave information quickly, which Dominic had expected. Men who operate through intermediaries tend not to have the conviction of men who get their hands dirty directly. The information he gave confirmed everything the intelligence team had already established and added detail. The charges against the Vey family's senior advisor were filed within the week. Dominic called a full council meeting. He did not like using the formal setting for things that could be handled quietly, but he had decided that this needed to be public, because the damage had been done publicly. The border settlements had been raided publicly, their people had been hurt publicly, and the resolution needed to be equally clear. He stood at the head of the table and presented the findings. He did not editorialize. He presented facts and let them do what facts do. When he finished, the silence in the room was the particular silence of people who are processing something serious. Cale said, after a moment, "The settlements that were targeted, compensation." "Yes," Dominic said. "That is already being arranged. Materials, supply relief, and formal pack recognition for Millhaven and 4 other settlements that had their status improperly delayed." Petra said, "The formal recognition for Millhaven specifically includes the market administration." "Yes," Dominic said. "Lena Ashvale will be formally recognized as settlement steward. The title does not change what she has been doing. It gives it the standing it should have had earlier." No one objected. This was not entirely unsurprising. The council had had several weeks to adjust to the direction things were moving. and the morning's presentation had made several things very clear about what the cost of certain kinds of political maneuvering looked like when it was fully documented. This was not a room full of people who wanted to be in that report. After the council meeting, Dominic went to write 2 letters. The first was to the Vey family, formal, legal, precise, and offering a clear path to resolution through proper channels. He did not enjoy writing it, but he wrote it carefully, because Lady Isolde had not been guilty of anything except being placed on a board she hadn't seen, and the family she was part of deserved the opportunity to respond appropriately before conclusions were made about all of them. The second letter was to Lena. He did not tell her everything in the letter. That was a conversation for in person, not paper. He told her that the network had been dismantled, and the settlements were secure, and that the recognition for Millhaven was moving through formal channels. He told her he was coming in 4 days. He added, "At the end, there is something I want to ask you, in person. It is not small, and I did not want to ask it in a letter." He sent both letters with the morning writers. He waited. The response from Lena came 3 days later, in her direct and practical handwriting. "The East Gate repair is finished, and the second drainage channel is holding. Mara has asked every day when you are coming. I have not given her a specific answer, because I didn't have one. Now I do." Then, below the practical information, in a line that was slightly more deliberate than the rest, "Whatever you want to ask me, ask it in person." He read it twice. He had already been planning to leave in 4 days. He left in 3. He arrived at Millhaven in the late afternoon, which was his preferred time to arrive because the light was right and the market was winding down, and the settlement had the particular quality of a place returning to itself after the day's work. He had stopped analyzing why he preferred this. He just did. Lena was at the market when he rode in. She looked up when the settlement's ambient sound shifted. Their eyes met across the square. She did not perform surprise or relief, or any of the things people performed when they were carefully managing how they seemed. She just looked at him for a moment, with whatever was on her face, and then she walked toward him. Mara, who had been sitting on the crate she had made into her regular station near the supply building, came running at top speed, shouting his name in the way she shouted most important announcements. He swung down from the horse and caught her without thinking about it. It happened before he had consciously decided to, because she was coming, and his hands were there, and that was simply what happened. She grabbed his arm with both hands and said, breathless and urgent, "The gray hen had chickens." "Did she?" he said. 3. I named them." "Good," he said. Lena had arrived. She was standing in front of him now, and whatever she had been managing about her expression was not entirely managed, and he did not try to read every piece of it, but he read enough. "Come have dinner," she said. It was not small, what she was saying. In the weeks since the night at the well, in the days since his letter and hers, something had shifted again. The door that had been left open was open wider now, and they both knew it. He set Mara down. He handed the reins to Riker, who had come up beside him. He said, to Lena, "There's something I want to ask you." "I know," she said. "Dinner first." He almost smiled. "Drainage first," he said, echoing what felt like a very long time ago. "Drainage first," she agreed, and there was something in her voice that was lighter than usual. Not the careful lightness of a person who is managing themselves, but the real kind, the kind that happens when something heavy has been set down. Mara had already started back toward the house, reporting the names of the baby chickens over her shoulder, in a tone that made it very clear the naming had been an extensive and important project. Dominic walked beside Lena across the market square of Millhaven, past the stalls that stood straight and solid, past the drainage channel that ran clear, past the well where he had sat, with her hand in his, in the early morning, after the worst night this settlement had seen in 2 years, and he thought about the council chambers, where things had been decided this week, and the letters he had written, and the network that had been dismantled, and he thought that all of it had been necessary, and all of it had been right, and none of it was the part that mattered to him most right now. What mattered most was the woman walking beside him, slightly too practical to be romantic about any of this, slightly too honest to pretend she was not glad he was here. He was going to ask her, after dinner. He thought she might say yes. He thought, more importantly, that whatever she said, he was going to mean it, the question, and the answer, and everything that followed, not because his wolf required it, or his counsel had been cleared, or the political complications had been resolved. Because she was exactly who she was, and he had been standing at windows for 7 years, waiting for something to make sense, and she made sense. She made more sense than anything had in a very long time. The house was warm when they came in. Mara went directly to the kitchen to report the names of the baby chickens in full, which took a few minutes, and involved a brief tangent about the hierarchy of the hen population in the market square, and where Square stood in it. Dominic listened to the full report, and asked 2 questions that Mara considered appropriate for the complexity of the subject. Lena started dinner. She moved around the kitchen with the economical ease she brought to everything, comfortable in the small space, quick without rushing, aware of Mara and Dominic at the table behind her without looking at them, the way you are aware of things that have become part of your ordinary sense of a room. He watched her and thought about the letter he had sent, that brief line at the end, "There is something I want to ask you, in person." He had been uncertain, writing it, whether it was the right thing to say before he was there to say it. He thought now that it was. She had had time to sit with it, she had not run from it. She had written back with market news and chicken names, and told him she knew what time he was arriving, and to ask her in person. She had made him soup for the first time on this visit. She set it on the table with the same practical efficiency as everything else, and bread that Mara had very clear opinions about, and the evening arranged itself around the table, in the way evenings had been arranging themselves for months now, the 3 of them, and the food, and Mara's conversation filling the room to its corners. He thought, this is the thing. Not the titles or the territory or the bond his wolf had recognized from 20 feet away in a market square. Not the formal recognition that was being arranged, or the council's approval, or any of the large structural things that surrounded what was happening. This. The soup and the bread, and the child telling him about the chicken hierarchy. The woman across the table who had not said yes yet, but whose face, when she looked at him across the lamp, was not managing itself at all. This was what he had come back to Millhaven for, every time. This was what his wolf had known. He was going to ask her after dinner. And something in him, the part that was not the Alpha King or the Iron Alpha or the ruler of 5 territories but simply Dominic, who had stood at too many windows alone, already knew what she was going to say. She said yes. Not immediately, not after dinner, as he had planned, because dinner became a longer thing than expected. Mara had many updates about the chickens, and a strong opinion about the bread Greta had brought over, and a grievance about something that had happened at the well that afternoon, which required full explanation. By the time the table was cleared and Mara was in bed and the kitchen was quiet, it was well into the evening, and the lamp between them was the kind of low that suggested late. He asked her. He said it plainly, without ceremony, which was the only way he knew how to say things that mattered. He wanted her in his life, formally, with all that meant. Not as a political arrangement, not as a title or a strategy, as himself, choosing her. She was quiet for a long moment. She was not performing the quiet, she was thinking in it, actually thinking, working something through, in the way she did when she was deciding how to lay the drainage channel, or whether the grain order numbers were right. He had learned to recognize this quiet. He did not interrupt it. Then she said yes. She said it the same way she said everything, straight, clear, without decoration. And then she looked at him with an expression that was not exactly composed but was honest, and she said, I need you to understand that this is still Millhaven first, for now. Until Mara has what she needs here, and I know this is real enough to move for. I understand, he said. I know you've said that before. And I meant it before, he said. And I mean it now. Millhaven first. For as long as that's what's needed. She looked at him. Okay, she said. For the 3rd time in the story of them. The word that was not small. The word that was a door. He stayed for 4 days. The 4 days were ordinary in the best way. He worked through the settlement's administrative recognition paperwork with Lena, which was genuinely necessary, and also an excuse to sit across a table from her for several hours at a stretch, which he found he had no objection to. Riker handled the patrol schedule for the eastern border with a reorganized team that no longer had anyone feeding information to the outside. The eastern gate, fully repaired after the night attack, stood solid. Mara showed him the 3 baby chickens. She had named them, with the same careful logic she applied to everything. The first was called Square, because she was round but Mara felt she had the character of a square. The second was called bread. The third was called afterbread, which Mara explained was because it had been born second, which came after the first, which was bread. Dominic accepted all of this information seriously. He spent one afternoon with Mara specifically, not because Lena arranged it or because it was planned, but because Lena had a long supply meeting with Greta and the settlement's other market managers, and Mara had nowhere particular to be, and she attached herself to Dominic with the proprietary ease she had developed over months, and said, "Let's see if we can catch Square." They did not catch Square. Square was faster than she looked. He spent 40 minutes in the market square of Millhaven, chasing a small chicken with a 4-year-old who kept falling down and getting up and laughing and falling down again, and at some point, he realized that he was not thinking about anything except the current location of the chicken and the best angle of approach, and that this absence of other thoughts was one of the more unusual and pleasant experiences he had had in a very long time. They did not catch Square. Mara declared it a successful afternoon anyway, on the grounds that Square had clearly enjoyed the attention. On his last evening, Lena walked with him to the edge of the settlement where his men were camped. The sun was going down behind the flat land, and the sky was doing the orange and gold thing it did this time of year, and the settlement's lights were beginning to show in the windows. She walked beside him, close enough that their arms touched and neither of them moved away. He had thought about what to say in this walk for several days. He had drafts in his head. None of them seemed right. He said, "I'll be back in 2 weeks." "I know," she said. "And I'll send the formal notification for the steward title before then. You'll need to sign the acceptance documents." "I know," she said again. "And the northern supply route is going to be adjusted, which means Millhaven's delivery schedule will change. The new schedule will come with the notification." She stopped walking. She turned and looked at him with the expression she used when she was finding him mildly exasperating in a way she was not going to be unkind about. "Dominic." "Yes. You're listing logistics." He paused. "I am." "You do that," she said. "When you don't know what else to say, you list logistics." He considered this. "Is that obvious?" "Only to me," she said. "I think." He looked at her in the evening light. She was looking at him with the expression he had been trying to find a name for since the first time he had seen it, the one that was warm and direct and fully present, with no management on it, exactly like the look she had been wearing when she watched Mara chase the hen, the look that had woken his wolf in the market square months ago. He understood now why it had woken his wolf. It was not a performance. It was the real thing, all of it, and it asked nothing from him in return, did not require him to match it or respond to it or be anything other than the person who happened to be in front of it. It was simply what she looked like when she was not guarding herself. She looked like that at him. "I don't know what to say," he said honestly. "You don't have to say anything," she said. "I have a lot I want to say. I'm not sure any of it comes out right." She tilted her head, slightly. "Then don't say it yet," she said. "We have time." He thought about the 7 years behind him. He thought about the years ahead that he could not see yet. He thought about Cale in the corridor, saying, "It's proof that you're still alive." He thought about standing at the window in the dark of Iron Peak, night after night, and the particular quality of that silence, not peaceful, just empty. He thought about the silence now, which was not empty. "I used to stand at the window," he said. "At night. I'd stand there for hours sometimes. I told myself I was thinking. I wasn't thinking. I was just standing there." She was listening. "I didn't know what I was waiting for," he said. "I didn't know it was waiting. It felt like something else. Like a man who's made his peace with where he is." He paused. "It wasn't peace. I know that now. It was a place where nothing could touch me, and I had mistaken that for being all right." She was quiet. "Your daughter laughed," he said, "at a chicken. And my wolf woke up. And I've been trying to understand what that means, and I think it means that the things that matter can find you, even when you have decided they can't. Even when you've built something very solid around yourself to keep the important things from getting in." Lena said, quietly, "Drainage first." He looked at her. "Whatever was built," she said, "it was the wrong order. You fixed the fence. You needed to fix the drainage first." He was looking at her. She was looking at him. The sun was mostly gone now, and the settlement's lights were warm behind her, and the sky above the flat land was the deep, clear blue of early evening. Yes, he said. Well, she said, the drainage is fixed now. He reached over and took her hand, the way she had taken his at the well, quietly, without ceremony, because the moment did not need anything more than that. They stood at the edge of Millhaven and watched the last of the light go. He rode out the next morning. 6 months later, Millhaven had been formally elevated to a primary settlement, the documentation signed, the recognition official, the title of steward formalized in the territory records with Lena's name attached to it in ink. The supply route had been adjusted, the patrol schedule around the eastern border had been rebuilt, and the 3 months since the network had been dismantled had produced not a single rogue incursion. Lena managed the market. She had hired 2 assistant market managers, which was new. The elevation in status had come with resources, and she had applied them in her methodical, priority-ordered way, starting with what would make the most difference to the most people. She did not hire the assistants to make things easier for herself. She hired them because one person carrying everything was not a good system, and she had always known that, and had simply not had the means to change it before. She had the means now. Dominic came to Millhaven regularly. He had adjusted his schedule to make this genuinely possible rather than simply squeezing it in between things, which had required some creative administrative restructuring that his steward had found deeply interesting and had managed with impressive restraint. Some of his operations had been relocated to Millhaven, which was technically about the settlement's strategic centrality on the southern border, and which was also about a kitchen table and a lamp, and a woman who chopped carrots small. Mara had, as predicted, been insufferable about all of it, in the most loving way possible. She called him Dom, which she had started doing on the 3rd visit after the formal recognition, and which she showed no signs of stopping. She had opinions about everything that happened in the settlement, and shared them freely with both Lena and Dominic, and occasionally with Riker, who had become a separate favorite due to his willingness to explain patrol logistics in terms a 4.5-year-old could follow. She was now 4.5. She had requested this update to her age be communicated to everyone in the settlement, and had verified that Dominic was aware of it. On an autumn morning, a clear, cold morning that smelled like the coming of the cold months, the kind of morning where the sky was an impossible shade of blue, Dominic was standing at the edge of the market square, reviewing a supply delivery with the settlement's new assistant manager. The sun was fully up, and the square was busy, and the air had the sound of work being done by people who were glad for it. He heard the laugh. He turned. Mara was at the far end of the square, near the overturned crate. The crate had been there so long it was practically furniture. She was chasing Square, now significantly larger than when she had first been named, a well-established hen with strong opinions about her freedom. Around its base, with the same strategy she had always used, which was no strategy at all, just the full force of enthusiasm, directed at a moving target. Square was not interested in being caught. Mara did not care. She laughed every time Square darted away. The same clear, open laugh, the one with no performance in it, the one that had nothing in it except the pure present fact of being exactly here, doing exactly this, and finding it wonderful. His wolf settled. That was the word. Settled. Not lifted, not stirred, not the rising alertness of something woken. Just settled. The way something comes to rest in exactly the right place, and does not need to move again. The way a fire sounds when it has all the wood it needs, and is burning cleanly, and there is no draft. He put down the supply sheet. He walked across the square to the crate, where Square was making another bid for freedom down the far side. He waited for the angle. Mara had told him months ago that Square always turned left near the eastern market post, and he moved at exactly the right moment and caught the hen with the efficiency of a man who had learned that chickens were a strategic problem like any other. Square was very offended. Mara was laughing so hard she had fallen over. He held the hen and looked down at the child on the ground, helpless with laughter, and something in his chest was so full and so simple, and so entirely without complication, that he stood there in the middle of the market square, and let it be exactly what it was. Lena appeared in the doorway of the supply building. She had flour on her hands, which meant she had been baking, which meant Mara had requested something specific for dinner. She leaned against the frame and watched them with the expression he had stopped trying to name, warm and direct and fully present, with nothing over it. She caught his eye. He looked at her, and something passed between them that did not need words, had never needed words, he thought, or not primarily. It was just recognition, the simple fact of two people seeing each other clearly. He handed Square to Mara, who accepted the hen with great ceremony and carried her away toward the far end of the square, still explaining the rules of the game to an audience of one who was almost certainly not listening. Dominic walked to the supply building doorway. He stood next to Lena. She did not move, and he did not move, and they both watched Mara attempt to convince Square that being put down was not in her best interest. She caught her, Lena said. I helped, he said. She's going to say she caught her. I know. She glanced at him. The corner of her mouth moved. Does that bother you? He thought about it honestly. No, he said. She looked back at Mara. He looked at Lena, looking at Mara. And then he looked at the market square, the stalls standing straight and solid, the drainage channel clean, the east gate firm in its frame, the supply building behind them, with flour on its counter, the settlement going about its morning in the determined, upright way that Millhaven had always gone about its morning, only now, with the additional resources and security, and standing to do it better than before. He thought about the window in Iron Peak that he had stood at for 7 years. He thought about peace, the real kind, the kind that is not the same as absence, the kind that is not what remains when something is gone, but what arrives when something is found. He had not known the difference for a long time. He understood it now. Mara came running back across the square, having apparently let Square go in exchange for the chase being more fun. She was already talking, narrating the details of the pursuit, with the energy of someone who had a great deal to report. She ran past both of them into the supply building, looking for the bread she had been promised. Lena pushed off the doorframe and went back inside. Dominic stood in the doorway for one more moment in the autumn morning, in the clear, cold air, with the sounds of the settlement around him, and the smell of bread coming from behind him, and his wolf quiet in his chest, in the good way, the way it had not been quiet in 7 years. The world had continued without him noticing, while he was standing at his window. Things had grown. Things had been built. A woman had been managing a settlement, and raising a child, and chopping carrots into small pieces, and doing what needed doing. In a border market square he had visited once, and forgotten, and then visited again, and could not stop visiting. His wolf had known before he did. It had heard the laugh, and it had known. He had caught up eventually. He stepped inside, out of the cold and into the warmth, and pulled the door closed behind him.